First of all, I want to thank everyone for attending the 2022 Administration on Community Living Traumatic Brain Injury Stakeholder Day. My name is Sean Calloway, and along with Elizabeth Leaf, I serve as Project Officer on the Traumatic Brain Injury State Partnership Planning Program. I also serve as Lead Contracting Officer Representative for the TBI Technical Assistance and Resource Center, better known as the TARC. By the way, one of the coolest acronyms out there for our federal contractors. Okay. Also, by the way, before I proceed, just want to give a quick shout out to Mr. Tom Campbell. He once served as our team lead for our TBI programs within ACL. He has transitioned on to Health and Human Services Administration on Community Living, but his contributions to this program and to the TBI programs were invaluable, and I just want to acknowledge him and thank him for his assistance over the years. As we all know, this particular day, the Stakeholder Day, is really in for observance for Brain Injury Awareness Month. Now, as you all well know, we are going virtual again this year. And sometimes, we all want to be in person to meet everyone. But the silver lining in this situation is that this allows many more stakeholders who were not able to travel to Washington, D.C. to participate in this year's program. So we're very grateful for that. Those who are involved in today's event are members of the TBI Leadership and Advisory Board members. Also, just want to acknowledge that they're going to highlight ACO programs that fund the Traumatic Brain Injury State Partnership Program and their stakeholders and their state partners, Also, we want to highlight that there will be federal partners displaying their initiatives towards the community, towards the TBI community, As we look at this goal of this particular program, it's to assist states in increasing access to services and supports for those individuals with traumatic brain injuries. And it's very imperative to let you know that as well as that we have 28 programs that are across the country that are servicing the traumatic brain injury community, and we're very grateful to them. This program is hosted by the TARC, the Technical Assistance Resource Center, and the TARC is actually funded by the Administration on Community Living. This program is free, and we welcome all across the country to participate. So with that said, I want to introduce my partner in crime and fellow project officer, Ms. Elizabeth Leaf.
Thank you, Sean. And hello, everybody. It's great to be with you here today. Before we hear about today's sessions, some logistics. Participants will be in the listen-only mode during the webinar. Please use the chat feature in Zoom to post questions and communicate with the host. During specific times in the webinar, you will have the opportunity to respond to questions that have been entered into the chat. This webinar will be live captioned in English. We will also have an ASL interpreter. The live webinar will include polls and evaluation questions. So please be prepared to interact during these polls. We really want to hear from you. Next slide. After the webinar, if you didn't get to ask the question that you wanted to during the session, you can always send up follow-up questions and feedback to the TBI TARC@hsri.org. Please note, this email address will not be monitored during the webinar. So try the live chat, and if that doesn't get an answer for you, please email hsri.org. A recording will be including a PDF version of the slides will be available on the ACL website shortly after the webinar. Next slide. This brings us to our first polling question, which should be on the screen. We want to know who is here and in what role do you self-identify. So please select all that apply for you, and we'll give it a few seconds before we close the poll. See, people are responding. Thank you very much. Give it another few seconds. Looks like we have a lot of social worker, counselors, and care managers. So this is great. Thank you all. The poll results, I'm not going to read them all just to save some time, but it looks like, as I said, the social workers are here in force. So thank you all for being here. At this time, let's go to the next slide and I'll turn it back over to Sean.
So I am so honored and pleased to announce our Principal Deputy Administrator, Alison Barkoff. Alison has been charged to execute direction, leadership, guidance, and coordination for all our ACL programs across the nation. Also, she provides guidance and sort of advisement to our Secretary of Health and Human Services. I personally just want to say, Alison has really made sure that ACL has been very engaging in providing service and benefit to our American citizens with disabilities in the aging population. And one thing I must say is that she has taken the time to listen to all stakeholders, not just ones who are receiving funding from ACL, but those who are just advocating and just looking out for those individuals with disabilities in the Asian population as well. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you Ms. Alison Barkoff.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you for that introduction. I want to really start by thanking our great ACL team. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Elizabeth, and as Sean mentioned, Tom, who have been part of our team, for the incredible work that you do. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you today, to talk a little bit about ACL's priorities, and really more than anything, to acknowledge all of y'all's incredible efforts and advocacy on behalf of the traumatic brain injury community. Today marks the 5th TBI Stakeholder Day, and this really is part of, as Sean just mentioned, ACL's goal of always making sure that the work that we do is informed by stakeholders. And I really loved looking at the poll that Elizabeth just put up, seeing the diversity of folks who are participating today and all the ways that we can work together on our shared goals. For those of you that I have not had the chance to meet, let me start by just sharing a little bit about my background. I was privileged to join the Administration for Community Living on Inauguration Day as the Principal Deputy Administrator. The mission of ACL, which is supporting opportunities for community living for all, has been my own life mission. And I know it's a mission that I share with each of you. I've spent my entire life being involved in advocacy around community living and all of the supports and services that go along with it. I've worked alongside people with disabilities and families and advocates from across the country. And it's shown me that we have to work together to make progress in our efforts to make sure people have the right to live, work, and fully participate in their communities. I've worked on policy change at national and state levels, and my work has always been centered on the principle that community living is possible for everyone, regardless of type of disability, level of support needed, or age. And so much of my work has focused on making the promises enshrined in our disability rights laws, like the Americans with Disabilities Act, a reality. We have come a long way over the last several decades. 40 years ago, when I started doing this work, there was no such thing as home and community-based services. And now every single state offers those services. But our work is so far from complete. Too many people are still living in institutions or at risk of entering one while they sit on wait lists, waiting for community-based services and supports. Too many people with disabilities still don't have full choice or control over their lives, face barriers to finding accessible housing or employment, or even experience discrimination in accessing healthcare. Every day in our engagement with the disability community, we hear about work that still needs to be done and that ACL touches. And We know that we have work to do together to make sure people with traumatic brain injuries are fully supported in their communities. We must work together to fight for better supports and never settle for the status quo. And we need to make sure that every person who is living with TBI, particularly people who have been historically underserved, can access services. And that includes people who are homeless, who have been involved in the criminal or juvenile justice systems, or who have experienced domestic violence. We certainly cannot ever think it's okay for even a single person to enter an institution because they have a brain injury, when we know that with the right supports, they can be living and participating in their own communities. One of the reasons I was so honored to accept my appointment from President Biden is because I truly believe that our work together to support all people with disabilities to live and meaningfully participate in their communities has never been more important, both because of the devastating impact that COVID-19 has had on our community and because of the big opportunities we have before us. Before I turn to talk about ACL and administration priorities and new opportunities, I want to thank each of you for listening. I'm so appreciative of each of the work you do each and every day to support people with traumatic brain injuries, to be self-advocates, and not only for the work you did before the pandemic, but the tireless and really exhausting work each of us have done during COVID-19, and that we will continue doing as we start moving towards recovery from the pandemic. So many of you have faced the pandemic head on and worked together to make sure everyone stays as safe as possible, had access to services and supports, even if they've had to look different, and has been able to access vaccinations and boosters. At ACL, we have worked alongside you to help ensure everyone has equal access to COVID vaccinations, testing, healthcare, and treatment. We truly know we've been in this battle together, and for all you have done, I'm so grateful. Let me touch on priorities. Of course, COVID-19 continues to be the priority for ACL and the administration. I know I don't have to tell any of you that people with disabilities have been so impacted in every way, from being at higher risk for infection and death, to issues with equitable access to healthcare and vaccinations, to the damaging effects of social isolation. You've seen that the administration started on day one by issuing an executive order and putting in a national strategy for COVID, with a significant focus on the issues people with disabilities have faced, whether that's about vaccines or testing or protecting the caregiving workforce, equity, and more. And ACL has been committed to being at the table and making sure the unique needs of people with disabilities are always considered. We've worked with the White House, the HHS COVID Task Force, the Equity Task Force, the CDC, and others. Even though we've had to focus so much energy on COVID, ACL and our federal partners also have worked hard to ensure at the same time that we don't backslide on the progress that we've all made together over years, including for people with traumatic brain injuries. Later today, you'll be hearing from a federal panel that will give you updates from ACL's Administration on Aging, SAMHSA, and the National Institute on Health on ways we are continuing to move our work forward in areas outside of COVID. Part of our responsibility inside of the federal government is to explain to policymakers how common traumatic brain injuries are, and that they can result from falls, motor vehicle crashes, assaults, sports injuries, and head traumas. Data from studies funded by ACL's National Institute for Disability Independent Living and Rehabilitative Research show that an astounding 1.5 million traumatic brain injuries are sustained each year. It's important that we educate policymakers of this reality. We know that TBI can affect many parts of a person's life. People living with TBI and their families often require a range of services and supports, and maybe throughout their entire lifetime. Individual needs can vary and change over time, so it's crucial that our systems provide person-centered services and supports. ACL's TBI Technical Assistance and Resource Center helps the 28 state partnership programs promote access to integrated, coordinated services and supports for people who have sustained a TBI, as well as aiding their families and caregivers. The center also provides a variety of resources to non-grantee states, policymakers, and providers. The Resource Center is committed to integrating the voices of people with lived experiences into its products, resources, and technical assistance. In fact, the center's activities are overseen and guided by people with lived experience together with other subject matter experts. As we say in our community, nothing about us without us. ACL strongly believes that people living with TBI need to be at the table when any agency is designing and implementing programs. And we are thrilled that the Resource Center is guided by the TBI Advisory and Leadership Group, or TAL group. This group, with whom you will hear from soon, is made up of individuals with TBI, family members, and caregivers who have lived TBI experiences. We believe programs are stronger and better utilized when people with disabilities are at the table. And that's why we ask state TBI advisory boards to have at least half of people with lived experience on their boards. The TBI State Partnership Programs work with local, state, and national organizations on a number of issues, including making sure that equity and intersectionality. I'll pause for a second while we wait for the next. Okay, great. The TBI State Partnership Programs work with state, local, and national organizations on a number of issues, including making sure that equity and intersectionality are front and center. And I understand those issues will be woven into sessions today. I want to pivot and talk about a second priority, which is around expanding home and community-based services and supporting our caregiving infrastructure. Over the last 2 years, we've seen caregivers, both the paid workforce and family caregivers, put under a lot of strain. The direct care workforce crisis has only worsened, and we've seen in too many circumstances, these workers were not treated as the essential workers that they are. Similarly, especially throughout COVID, family caregivers have had to take on even more, filling in gaps in lost services. COVID has created a national urgency like never before to expand home and community-based services, strengthen the direct care workforce, and support family caregivers, what President Biden has collectively called the caregiving infrastructure. The administration and Congress have already worked together to take some initial big steps to address this infrastructure by investing in home and community-based services. As part of the American Rescue Plan passed in the spring of 2021, there was $12.7 billion in increased funding to state home and community-based service programs. This funding has been crucial, and states have been using it to expand services, serving people on waiting lists, supporting the direct care workforce, and supporting family caregivers, just to name a few options. There is no doubt that some of these funds have helped expand services for people living with traumatic brain injuries. And I know that some of you have been very engaged in advocacy at the state level to make sure this funding is spent in ways that will really help the people who most need it. At ACL, we have also made sure that our leadership and the president understands the importance of the traumatic brain injury programs that we fund. And the president's 2022 budget includes a request for increased funding in TBI State Partnership Programs. In addition, the TBI State Partnership Programs recently received $2.2 million as part of the public health workforce funding that ACL was able to push out to our networks. This funding was part of the American Rescue Plan and part of helping expand the capacity of public health systems to address the needs of people with disabilities and older adults. Because of y'all's advocacy, leaders in our government know that these investments are important, but not enough to address the enormity of need. That's why the president has proposed $150 billion investment in caregiving as part of his Build Back Better plan. And your ongoing education and sharing of stories about this ongoing unmet need is more important now than ever. I want to close by thanking all of you again for your advocacy on behalf of everyone who is living with traumatic brain injuries. Your collective voice is absolutely making a difference. And although progress is never as fast as we want, we absolutely are making progress together. Together, we can continue to make a difference for the millions of people who are living with traumatic brain injuries. And I pledge on behalf of ACL that we are here to work alongside you on the issues that matter to you most. I'd now like to take a moment to introduce to each of you ACL's new Commissioner of the Administration on Disabilities, Jill Jacobs. Jill was appointed to her position just a few weeks ago, and I've asked her to briefly join us to say hello, tell all of you a little bit about herself. Jill, welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Alison. Hello, everybody. I'm very pleased and honored to be here today. I appreciate the invitation and the hard work that our team here, Sean, Elizabeth, and everyone else at ACL has done to get this together. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself real quickly. I'll start with my professional history. I have done a lot of work in the IL community, independent living community. Spent a lot of my life focused on grassroots advocacy and activism. And I most recently was executive director of a Center for Independent Living, the Independent Center of Northern Virginia, before coming here. I have a lot of experience with developmental disabilities, both professionally and personally. Ran an organization that provided home and community-based services in the Commonwealth of Virginia for 16 years. I've done a lot of program work, policy work, and actual service delivery to people with disabilities, including people with TBI. I've done a lot of disaster relief and rescue specifically focused on people with disabilities. And I hope that all of that, my professional experience can bring to the table what will really help the AOD and ACL move forward in our vision. On a personal level, I have a disability myself. I was raised by a person with a disability. My father had quadriplegia, and I have 2 adult children who have disabilities as well. So this is both personal and professional work that I do, and I am extremely honored to have been appointed as the AOD commissioner and to be here at ACL. I am completely committed to my role here. I take it very, very seriously. Community living is very important to me. I value it at the highest level, and I am extremely appreciative that you all have asked me to be here today. And I look forward to the work we're all going to do together on building a partnership and building a really great team to move forward. And I will now turn it back to Sean.
Thank you for your outstanding remarks. And by the way, I see that the chat box is quite hot, and I just want to really.
Sean, you're breaking out. And you're talking.
Can you hear me?
Okay, try again. I think we have you now.
Got me? Okay. All right. So next up, we'll have our members from the TARC. The outstanding person worked hard to within the TBI community. So please welcome Miss Maria.
Hi there, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. I would like to ask our first session panelists to join at this point in time. I am Maria Crowley, and I work for the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators and for the TBI Technical Assistance and Resource Center. I have wavy silver hair, I have a large bookcase in my background, and I'm wearing a black shirt and a red jacket. Thank you so much for joining us. The TARC, as we call it, as Sean referred to it earlier today, promotes access to services and supports across all states for people who have sustained a traumatic brain injury, their families, and caregivers. We also provide resources to unfunded states, people affected by brain injury as a whole, both traumatic and otherwise, policymakers, and other stakeholders. Welcome to our first session. The TARC, as you have heard, is fully committed to injecting the voice of people with actual lived experience of traumatic brain injury into our products and activities. We believe in this so much that our activities are overseen and guided by people with lived experience. We refer to those experts that help us with this work as the TBI Advisory Leadership Group, or the TAL group. As you have already heard, ACL also believes that this is the most important voice, the individuals that are living with brain injury today, that those folks should be at the table, should be fully participating members helping to guide state planning. Here with you today are 4 members of our TAL group who are each involved in their own states and work at a national level. And they're going to share some of their knowledge and experience with you today in being a part of your state work, with some wise words on what works and what does not work, and how you can make sure that you're fully engaging individuals who represent brain injury on all levels and for all groups. For the sake of time, their bios are in the form that was emailed to you earlier today, but let me introduce them to you. We have Clifford Heimowitz from the state of New York. We have Kelly Lang from the state of Virginia. We have Maria Martinez from the state of Colorado. And we have Carol Starr, who's from the state of Maine. Welcome to all of you. And Terry, if you'd advance to the next slide, please. So we want to run through some questions with each of you and hear some information from you. Let's start with these. And Carol, as I see you first on my screen, how about if we start with you? Sure. If you could, describe your best experience as a brain injury survivor serving on a board or committee or task force. What worked for you?
Well, I've been a brain injury survivor for nearly 23 years, so I've had a number of experiences on board. So when I thought about my best experiences, I kind of mushed them together, kind of thought about all of the good experiences that I've had. And there were a number of things that stood out to me about what makes a good experience. And 3 things really stood out. And one of them was, a good experience for me is when I feel like I'm part of the team. That for me, being able to build relationships on a board, feeling like I have colleagues, it is just as important as whatever task we're working on a board. Like many brain injury survivors, I lost my career. I was 32 when I lost my career. I lost my career almost before it really began. So being able to do these very, very part-time kind of boards, it does feel like a job to me. And I like being able to have colleagues. That's really important to me. And because everything I do, there's a cost, there's a brain injury cost to it. I've rested before I do this, I'll rest again afterwards. And so it needs to be worth getting tired for, and feeling like I have colleagues on a board, that makes it worth getting tired for. Another thing that makes it a good experience is when I feel like my opinions matter, that my ideas are listened to and they're acted on when possible. I mean, I get it that not every idea is going to be possible to be acted on, but I like it when I know that I am being listened to and that those ideas are being put into practice when it's possible, and that things can change. If I say this isn't working, then there's a concerted effort to say, okay, well, how can we make it better? And I like it when I see that there's an impact to what we're doing. I like to know that my being there, it actually makes a difference. I don't want to be there to just check a box. Oh, phew, we found another survivor to fill a seat. I'm there because I want to do good work. Because like I said, with the brain injury, it does take it out of me. It causes fatigue for me to do these things, which I understand. I fully accept that consequence, but I want to feel like my participation matters in a group, that I'm not there to just be talked at. I'm there to actually do good work with others. On the flip side, then the negative experiences that I've had have kind of been the opposite of what I've said, of when I felt like I'm not, part of a team, when I don't feel like my opinions have mattered, when I don't see an impact, and also when the structure hasn't worked, if meetings are too long, if there aren't breaks, if they're too far away, those sorts of things, or if the topics are only of interest to professionals, if there aren't topics that are of interest to me. Those are some of the negative experiences that I've had.
Excellent. Great points. Cliff, if you would, describe your best experience and worst experience as a brain injury survivor serving on a board.
Well, I want to start off by saying that I'm grateful for being part of the New York State Traumatic Brain Injury Service Coordinating Council. As a person who's on the TBI waiver, it provided me a platform to be able to address the needs of people in New York State. I like the fact that I'm creating networks with my peers. It's very hard to do where I live locally. So to meet peers that are also involved has been a great experience. I guess the most frustrating experience has been the lack of priority by New York State to have programs for people with traumatic brain injuries. So I'm a person who likes to see things happen. So I guess my most frustrating thing is when we just talk and we don't accomplish anything. And so that's my best and my worst. So thank you very much for having me speak.
Great points. Maria Martinez, I'm sorry, we have two Marias on our panel today. I'll try to use our last names. Maria, describe your best experience and your worst experience.
Good morning, everybody. I think my best experience has been being mentored by those that I've worked with as far as lived experience and non-lived experience people. I find that listening to people, you start learning of their challenges, from all communities. And I think that's what allows me to continue to go forward. What's worked for me has been utilizing the engagement strategies that were developed by lived experienced people, and I think that's essential to helping us move forward in this hardcore direction that we deal with every day with people with brain injuries. So thank you for allowing me to be here today. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Kelly Lang, tell us about your best and worst experiences.
Well, one of my best experiences was knowing the organization that I was going to become involved in, that I was going to sit on their board. And I had already developed a relationship with a lot of them, a lot of people in the organization, especially the executive director. And so I knew what they did. I knew what their goals and mission were. So that helped tremendously. Also being prepared. I, would read the materials days before the meeting, read them again, day before, day of, and knew what we were going to talk about, knew what subject matters were going to be discussed. And if I didn't know what it all meant, I looked it up, I researched it. Another thing I did was knew that not every single agenda item was going to be one of my, strengths. And so I knew which ones to focus on, and the others I could just sit back, and that allowed me times to take my own mental break, even if it wasn't being provided by the group. So I would say That would be my advice and my best experience. My worst experience was I was not very far into my recovery when I joined a board. And I don't think I was ready. I was overwhelmed. I didn't really know the people very well. They were very disorganized. There was no mentoring. There was no opportunity I wasn't even strong enough to ask for an accommodation at that point. So I think it's knowing yourself, knowing when you're ready to join a board, because it is a big step, but it can be a great step to grow your skills and to empower, just to feel empowerment.
Again, great points. Thank you for sharing a little bit about some of your experiences. Next slide. We're just going to make a shift to talking a little bit about recruiting individuals with lived experience, and not only recruiting, but retaining those individuals on some of the boards and committees that many of you work on. So we'll just go in reverse order. And Kelly, I'll start with you this time. As a survivor, what would you say would be the advice that you would give to boards that are looking for more survivors?
This is a great question, since I'm actually chairing the committee for Virginia. I think one of the first things is to the board needs to look at what the survivor, the person with lived experience, has been doing, how far along they are in their recovery. Are they ready to fully serve on a board? And for them to understand that it is not just a one issue. Sometimes people will join boards because there's an issue that they care about, and once that issue is covered, they kind of check out. So they need to know that this is a very encompassing group, that there's going to be things discussed that you might not have a particular interest in, but you still have to do your part. And have mentors. I think the board should provide mentorship. They should provide a point person who the person with lived experience can meet with, who can get, have pre-meetings to discuss the agenda and things that will be discussed. I think orientation and mentorships are huge. I was on a group, we didn't have that, we instituted it, and I think we have stronger membership now because of it.
Great. Why would you stay on a board versus stepping off of a board?
I would stay on if I felt valued, if I felt that my contributions are appreciated by the board. I'm very much a team player. So if I feel that I'm being validated, that what I have to bring matters and is respected, then I would stay. If I did not feel that I was making any difference, if I did not feel the board had, the best interests of their group in mind, then I would leave.
Makes sense. Maria, what would be your advice for boards that are looking to engage more survivors?
I would ask them to look at their communities, all communities, whether they come from a rural, frontier, metropolitan areas. Look at the advocates that are in your community, the support group leaders, the peer mentors, the alliances that you have in your communities. Those are the people that will bring forth what is needed. And I think to keep them on is to allow them to use the skills that they have. We have a lot of brain injury people that have just tremendous skills that could be given to the board. And as well as we get mentored. We get mentored as we participate on being on boards. And that's something that I think has allowed me to feel that my confidence has grown. It allows me to speak clearly about what I feel our community needs. And I felt very positive about the Colorado board, and I'm very grateful that I've been able to interact with other states, and I've learned so much from them, and it's helped me produce. And I think that's the thing, that's the action that we really need. And I think that's important. Thank you.
You think that action is what keeps you on that board instead of looking for other opportunities?
Yeah, definitely. It's, when you're incorporated into the board, like right now, I'm learning to be a co-chair, and I know, and I'm participating in interviews and things that I think are essential for lived experience. I think that's something that we need greatly.
Great. Thank you. Cliff, what would be your advice for boards looking for more survivor participation?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Maria Martinez. She's been a great mentor for me. And so she's a real reason why I like to participate. But my advice would be cultural competency. There's so many people that are not receiving adequate health care. They're disengaged in the community. And those are the people that we really need to recruit, because they could give us insight on the issues that maybe the people participating who are part of the mainstream don't have. And also I would suggest that they seek participation by the group members. I think it's really important that the person who's the chair of the board has got to know how to delegate and to keep things on track. Why I stay on the board versus leave? I have a vested interest. Like I said, I'm on the TBI waiver, so it's really important for me to keep in touch with what's happening in my state regarding the waiver. And also because I want to set an example for other people with traumatic brain injuries that, yeah, it's not always going to be easy, but nothing struggle for, nothing gain. But Maria really taught me about cultural diversity, and I just think that's what would be my main message of cultural diversity. So, thank you.
Great. And getting participation from everybody. Well said. Carol, what would be your advice?
I think building on what Maria was saying, recruiting support group leaders as in terms of finding potential board members, because I'm a support group leader. And I think that any support group leader worth their salt can tell you who the members of their group are who have made the transition from they tell their story because they need to tell it for themselves to they start to tell their story because they're telling it to help other people. And it's a beautiful thing to witness in a group as people make that transition. And when people have made that transition, that they're no longer telling their story for themselves, they're telling it because their story is going to help somebody else. I think that that's when they're potentially ready to be joining a board. And support group leaders can tell you who the people are in their groups who have reached that stage. And those are folks who are ready to begin to think about the next level of commitment if they're interested. And another idea that I have is finding ways for, at least at the beginning, for commitments to be short, to be small, to be short and small and short time commitments, because none of us sprang like fully formed as advocates. I know in my own journey, I would do like little projects and then I would kind of fade back into the woodwork because early on, I couldn't take on like being a member on a board, like every month meetings. It was just too much for my brain injury, but I could do little projects. And over time, those little projects built into more participation and experiencing success at those little things. It gave me the confidence that I could eventually grow into bigger things, which is what happened. So I think that finding ways for survivors to be involved in those small things, kind of as a platform to eventually growing into bigger things. And that kind of relates to what Kelly was saying about mentorship, that it is a process, because joining a board, it's a very daunting thing that so many of us after our injuries, we feel less than. We don't feel competent anymore. And the more experiences we have that help us feel that way, the better board members we can be. And I think why I would stay on a board versus leave, I will stay on a board if I feel like I'm making a difference, if I feel like my skills are growing. And reasons why I might leave is if participating, is it causing me too many brain injury symptoms? I always have to do that cost benefit kind of analysis. How much fatigue is something causing me? If participating is causing me days on the couch afterwards, it's too much for my brain. If I feel like every single meeting that I go to, I can't keep up. It's going too fast for me. People are talking too fast. The topics are changing too fast. Then I feel like I'm failing. And as brain injury survivors, a lot of us, we feel like we fail a lot. And I don't want to feel that way on a board. I want to feel successful. So if I don't feel like can have success in some way, that's something that would make me want to leave. And also if I feel isolated, if I feel like there aren't other survivors particularly to talk to, if there aren't other people who understand what my concerns might be, if there's nobody to share those with, those are all reasons why I would consider leaving a board.
Great points. And, I've heard you talk about knowing yourself, which makes so much sense for all of us, doesn't it? To be the best we can be. Next slide. Very well said, all of you. You're making some outstanding points. Cliff, I'm going to start with you this time. If you could give one piece of advice for board chairs running boards and committees, what would it be?
Empower your members. That's it.
All right. Well said. Carol, what would your advice be?
Be open to redesigning how things are done. That could be where you meet, when you meet, the time, how often, the topics you cover, how you structure the meetings. I think when half of your group potentially has some of the issues that Kelly, Maria, Cliff, and I have been talking about, it doesn't work if you try to force us into a neuronormal structure, because for us as survivors, our brain injuries, they pretty much always win. But as survivors, I know that we also have tremendous insights to offer if a structure is set up to let us offer those insights.
Great. Kelly?
I would agree with all of that, especially my advice would be to welcome a person with lived experience personally, to get to know them, to ask them, what type of accommodations do you need, or how can we make this better for you? How can we make these meetings work for you? It might be something as simple as adding breaks in, adding more, instead of having one break in the middle, do a few extra breaks, or not to use acronyms, because acronyms are really difficult for anyone with a brain injury. Just to be open to suggestions, like Carol said, maybe some type of restructuring of committees or restructuring of the meeting times or the meeting days, anything like that.
Great. Maria, one piece of advice.
I guess, after hearing everybody speak and share, I would say continue building the bridge, bring in anybody that is willing to understand what the mission is, that they leave their personal agenda at home and they go with the flow of what the state is working towards to be able to meet the needs of all brain injured people. I think we got to let our voices be heard. Our voices are so imperative to this cause. So I appreciate that. You guys have been sharing your thoughts. So thank you.
They are so important. Next slide. You have heard a lot of really important nuggets of information from the four panelists as we've been talking. And they have created a tool that shares some of those pieces of information and some other things that as a group they thought would be good for some of you to know more about in terms of engagement strategies that you see in front of you. So be sure and check that out. The links are provided there. And then I want to save some time for us to maybe do a little bit of Q&A. And I've seen a couple of questions pop up in the chats. One really good question was, how do survivors find out about positions on boards. Any advice that the four of you might want to share with that?
I think just being involved in your local brain injury community is number one. A lot of times that's how you'll hear things. Like Carol had mentioned, support groups. If you speak at, with a speakers bureau, if you have case management services, being in the, what I would call the brain injury community, you're going to hear about things. And that's how, and, maybe you're not ready to join right away, but you take those steps to be strong enough to join.
Great.
Sign up for newsletters. If there's a newsletter from your local brain injury association, sign up for it. If there's a conference, go to it or attend it virtually, because oftentimes they will announce opportunities, or if there's an open meeting for a group, go as a guest and see what you think, and you can learn about what's going on without yet making a commitment at first.
Mm-hmm. Cliff?
Most important thing to do is make yourself available. Because so many people reach out to me because they hear my story. And so it's really important that you be articulate and that you don't make it about yourself, but make it about the issues. I think that all too often people center things around themselves, and it's really more important. But I think the most important thing is to make yourself available. I mean, I'm hoping that we can get a mentoring program in New York State because I think it's really needed. And I think that's a great way of recruiting people, because as people get mentored, you get them more involved. So I'd like to see that happen. Thank you.
Great point. Maria, anything you wanted to add to that in terms of finding where opportunities are?
I would definitely use social media because you can find a lot of information on social media.
You can. It's sort of the great equalizer in some ways, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I also just another idea. If there's a board that you're interested in, as brain injury survivors, I think we want to help other survivors. So you can reach out to other survivors who are on boards and ask us, how did you find this? What's your journey like? Because those of us who are further along in the journey, it can help those who are just starting their journey, kind of wanting to be on boards.
Mm-hmm. I've seen a couple of questions in the chat related to mentoring, and whether or not your council has mentoring, and how you feel about that, and if they don't, what are some things maybe to put into place? Maria, do you want to talk first about that?
I'm a strong advocate of mentoring. I love the peer mentorship programs, and I think those are ways that we could build and educate our mentees as far as being involved in boards and participating in task force and research programs and what have you. I think when you have a peer that wants to be part of something more than just a support group, that's when you take them under your umbrella. And I've done that with an individual, and I think she's going to learn, be an asset to our board. So hopefully, we can fine tune how we can incorporate that more and more into our support groups as a whole throughout the state.
Right. Kelly, anything you want to add about that? I saw a question that was directed about mentoring to you specifically.
Oh, I didn't see that. Yeah, I think, like I discussed before, it's actually Carol and I came up with the mentoring program. And because we felt that when we joined this particular group that we were flying blind. We had no idea what we were doing because the group didn't know what they were doing. So we came up with this program and to mentor someone for the first year and, to do check-ins regularly to make sure they were okay, make sure they didn't have any questions, to explain certain policies, procedures, things, and just to make sure they were feeling comfortable and building their self-confidence, because really that's one of the big points, is to build their self-confidence so they can speak up and talk about what what's really important to them.
Yeah, for sure. Carol, hang on just 1 second, Cliff. I want to give Carol an opportunity to respond to that.
Yeah, I think just having that one person to kind of go to when you have questions, and knowing that you have a contact. Thinking about many boards that I've been on, it's basically been kind of sink or swim. But as I kind of was reflecting on it, but when I joined all those boards, I had an outside mentor at the time. She wasn't necessarily on those boards; she had kind of retired, but she was still my mentor. So she was helping me, even though she wasn't on those boards. It probably would have been a very different experience for me if I had just joined those boards in the sink or swim without her. Because I was lost. But I had somebody at least another survivor quote on the outside, because she'd done all this stuff previously. Mm-hmm. So she could kind of guide me, even though she wasn't at the meetings currently. And how, as I think about where would I be without her? And it's a privilege now to be a mentor myself and to help others along that path, and how important that is. And I think if we want more engaged survivors, that the mentorship is a crucial part of it.
Almost a pay it forward is what it sounds like you're describing. Yeah. Yes. Cliff, what do you want to add?
One issue that wasn't really crossed was about the need to be involved cross-disability wise. TBI falls into every other disability. And so it's really important to engage with the development disability community, the mental health community, the substance use community. I mean, all these communities need to be educated about what TBI is, because it's all interwoven. And, so I think I can't wait to hear Alabama talk about how they engage with the mental health community, because that's what I'm trying to do also. And so I think it's really important to be cross-disability related, not just stay in your own community, but to increase awareness about TBI to people who may have a TBI, they don't even know they have it. I mean, so many people go undiagnosed. It's just, so I think that's really important. So thank you very much.
I think that's a great point. And I think it's a nice way, maybe even for us to summarize our session, because unlike other things, brain injury happens across all those groups, right? To people of all ages, people of all backgrounds, people of all races. And it can happen more than once. And it's important to be aware at all those levels, all those points of contact you can have with somebody that has a brain injury. I really appreciate that. You guys have made some fabulous points, and some of the things that have come through loud and clear to me, at least, are how important it is to feel like you're part of a team, that your opinions matter and you feel valued. You like to see the impact of the work that you're doing, how it's very helpful to sort of start small and then grow within a group and across an effort, to sort of feel like when you're ready to participate on a board, focusing on the agenda items and sort of saving your best for the things that are most important to you. Certainly being mentored and being a mentor, and knowing the organization and doing some research about where you're heading, I think, is also really, really important. We appreciate the involvement that all of you have. You can see why we like working so much with this group of individuals, with the TARC. And they work with a lot of the states that they're a part of, but also with folks in other states. So if you'd like to know more about some of that work, you can reach out to us. And I just appreciate your time that you've given today. You can put any questions for these folks in the chat. I hope that you guys will stay on and take a look at some of those things and see if there's some questions you'd like to answer. And with that, thank you for your insight and your guidance. And I'm going to turn things over to Judy Detmer to introduce the next session.
Great. Thanks, Maria. Thank you to the panel. What a great session that was. My name is Judy Detmer, and I am also with the TBI TARC, the Technical Assistance and Resource Center. I also work for the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. I have short hair and glasses, and behind me are some old-fashioned posters of Hawaii and Minnesota and some old movie theater seats. I have the honor of introducing our next session, the second session for today, which is titled Domestic Violence and the Effects on Children. And I get to invite our two speakers up, Rachel and Monica, if you guys could turn on your cameras. Monica is with the Ohio Valley Center for Brain Injury Prevention and Rehabilitation at The Ohio State University. And Rachel, who will be coming up later, is with the Center on Partner-Inflicted Brain Injury. Just as a reminder, their full bios are in your packets. We won't be reviewing their full bios just so they have more time to present their content. So with that, I am going to turn it right over to you, Monica, and I will be back to help facilitate questions.
Thank you, Judy, for that introduction. Like she said, I'm Monica Litchi. I'm located in Columbus, Ohio. I'm the program director for the Ohio Brain Injury Program. I also have the pleasure of serving as the board president for the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. I am a white female in my early 40s wearing black rimmed eyeglasses with long brown hair. I have a yellow top on and a black and white scarf. I'm so happy to be here with you today to talk about this relationship between the Ohio Brain Injury Program and the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. I'm just going to spend a few minutes telling you all a story that will sound familiar to stories that have occurred in your own states and in your own programs. Next slide, please, Terry. Before I get started, I want to acknowledge our amazing team in Ohio. On this slide is a series of black and white headshots of the fabulous people I get to work with day in and day out. Dr. John Corrigan, our fearless leader, Bree Miller, our newest member and our program manager, Beth Windish, who has been working in the field of brain injury for 35 years now and is our lead clinical case manager. And last but certainly not least, Amy Lawson, our other clinical case manager, who is just about to celebrate her second year with us. Terry, next slide, please. So let me begin my story. On this slide, there are two images. One of a woman holding a microphone, standing in front of a small crowd of seated people, seemingly giving a talk. In 2016, just a few years after the State Brain Injury Program came to be housed with us at The Ohio State University, I received a training request from the Ohio Domestic Violence Network on traumatic brain injury and its relationship to domestic violence. The Brain Injury Program in Ohio had not really been working in this space, and I was just a couple of years into this role, so I hesitated. But instead of saying no, I reached out to our partners at the Brain Injury Association of Ohio, and together we did the presentation. And this leads me to the second image on the screen, which is a hand holding a phone with a series of envelopes hovering above, depicting the seemingly thousands of emails we get every day, especially in March. I had been added to the Ohio Domestic Violence Network's mailing list as a result of the presentation. And 6 months after we had done that initial talk, I noticed something that caught my eye. Someone named Rachel Ramirez had gotten a grant to serve people with mental health disabilities and traumatic brain injury. Who was this new person working in our space? And how could we get her to talk her into hanging out with us? Next slide, Terry. So this slide also depicts two images, both of people sitting around a table with laptops, papers, pens, and lots of probably very strong coffee. Wasting no time, and I do mean mere minutes after seeing that email, we reached out to Rachel and invited her to join our Ohio Brain Injury Advisory Committee. Enthusiastically, and if you know Rachel, you do know that I mean enthusiastically, she and her colleague joined our advisory committee. And as Rachel began working on their new grant, they in turn invited us to join their Ohio Domestic Violence Network Steering Committee and Community of Practice. In the years that followed, so much great work came from this mutual relationship. The CARE project, which Rachel will speak to today, flourished, and the Domestic Violence Network in Ohio became brain injury informed. And in turn, our Ohio Brain Injury Committee and program has benefited greatly from the knowledge of the relationship between brain injury and intimate partner violence. Rachel has been a steadfast member of our committee and continues to bring new insights to our group, including a very recent presentation on a new collaboration in Ohio with the Forensic Nursing Network. And additionally, very excitedly, Rachel and the Ohio Domestic Violence Network will be working on our new resource facilitation program so that we can provide specialized, informed, person-centered care to people who have experienced both intimate partner violence and brain injury. And Terry, my last slide. So why do I tell you the story knowing full well that this is something that each of you do day in, day out in your states and in your programs? It's because of this. On this slide is an image of a series of individuals' hands on top of each other depicting teamwork. And this quote, a reminder of why what we do and how we do it is important. Helen Keller said, alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to my co-presenter extraordinaire, Rachel Ramirez with the Ohio Domestic Violence Network.
Thank you so much, Monica. That was just a joy to hear and a joy to listen to. And I think that I am really excited to be here today. I'm going to start sharing my slides and we'll tell you a little bit kind of from my side of things, in my perspective of this work and having the opportunity to come here and talk to you about domestic violence in children and just all of the opportunities that we have to really work better together as a system. I would like to take one quick minute to thank the panel. I learned so much from that panel. And I think one of the things several of you talked about, the importance of multidisciplinary collaboration, collaborating across disabilities. But I also think that, our experience in domestic violence 5 years ago, just to give you a background, and I'm actually going to introduce you just a little bit to the domestic violence world and kind of what that is. Monica has been an amazing mentor in helping me learn about brain injury, helping me learn. I remember at some of those initial meetings, even ACL, that was an acronym I had never heard. I know that we had plenty of acronyms we were throwing around that Monica was also trying to Google on her phone and figure out while I was trying to Google some of the brain injury lingo. But I want to really, really think about, I think it was, one of the survivors, one of the brain injury survivors that shared with us, it might have been Clifford, about how many people are out there that aren't even aware and how many systems are out there that aren't even aware of the role that brain injury could play with the people that they serve. In domestic violence, I hope when we put on those lists of systems or places that we're looking to collaborate with to reach out to, I hope that those of us who provide domestic violence services make that list, because we have really, really come to believe that brain injury is a tremendously significant issue for the survivors that we serve. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I did just want to take just a minute as we get started, just to kind of introduce you to the domestic violence service system and the domestic violence world and what it is and how it works. So my name is Rachel. I work for the Ohio Domestic Violence Network, which is the statewide coalition on domestic violence. Every state in the nation has a statewide coalition that works on domestic violence. We receive a small slice of federal funding from the Department of Health and Human Services. Each federally recognized statewide coalition does. We are not a part of state government, but we are all nonprofit membership organizations, which our largest kind of bulk of members are the local domestic violence programs that provide domestic violence services across all our states. And I will talk about those local programs in just a minute. Statewide coalitions, the organization that I work with, are funded by federal grants. Some grants have a line item in them. Some states have a line item in them for state funding. Some states don't. And they provide a wide variety of services. So I think that that's something that's very, very important for those of you who are interested in reaching out to the domestic violence world and the domestic violence system, is just to understand that it can look very, very different. Each state can look very different. Each program can look very different. But one of the similarities, and there are lots of, I could spend 25 minutes talking about all of the things that our agency does. but DV program capacity building, working with local domestic violence service providers, providing training, technical assistance, best practices, developing resources, is a core service of what every coalition across the United States provides, including, and there are coalitions in the United States territories also. So our members are made up of local domestic violence programs. Depending on your state, there are states that certify DV programs. The number of DV programs, a DV program individually, and the number of domestic violence programs in your state can vary by size, can vary by number, can vary by services. We in Ohio have 74 local domestic violence programs that provide services for our 88 counties. There are other states that have 15 programs. There are states that have more than those. And most of these, again, are independent organizations. Some domestic violence programs are standalone programs. Others might be part of a YWCA, a larger mental health agency. It just kind of depends on your area. And while services offered vary, they're often dependent on what services we provide are things we can get funded. But most have core domestic violence services, which includes 24-hour hotlines. The vast majority of domestic violence programs do offer shelter or residential services, housing services for domestic violence survivors who are not safe at home. But it's really important to know that domestic violence shelters do a lot more than shelter. They provide a lot of additional services. We do advocacy in lots of different systems. We do safety planning, and we will be talking again with children's services. Many domestic violence provides specific services to children. Finally, our last kind of group of people is thinking about the allied professionals, is kind of what we call them. People like you, who are other systems or professions that work with domestic violence survivors. In our system, we historically have had a very strong focus on relationships with law enforcement and court systems. A part of that has to do because the Violence Against Women Act was the very first federal, kind of the largest federal funding stream for domestic violence programs, originally passed in 1994. That was a part of a larger criminal justice bill. So a lot of times the grants that we have are very focused on capacity building, training, and collaboration between law enforcement and court systems and domestic violence agencies. But we also have a lot of other systems and areas that we work with, including house, health, other social services. And now one of the things that we're so excited about is thinking about brain injury in the partnerships that I think we've kind of operated in two very separate orbits and separate spheres. But I think, as Monica was excited to really learn about domestic violence, when we got our original grant to look at brain injury, I always say I didn't know anything about brain injury I know brain injury from a hole in the wall. Didn't know anything about it, didn't know what it looked like, didn't know what it meant, didn't know how to define it. So I think really when we're looking at this intersection of brain injury and domestic violence, the brain injury world and the domestic violence world both bring very deep but separate expertise. And domestic violence can't do this without brain injury, and brain injury can't do this without domestic violence. So I think it is really building those relationships and being really, really open to brain injury is something that is very, very different from what we've worked with in domestic violence. And I think likewise, there's a lot of very unique characteristics of domestic violence and the situations of domestic violence survivors that might be different from the people that brain injury systems have traditionally worked with. So we need to have a really strong partnership where we come very open and engaged and curious to learn about each other. I'm going to start by really helping us understand domestic violence and the dynamics of domestic violence as we get into moving into talking about domestic violence in children. And this is not one of those presentations where I'm going to give you all of these dictionary definitions and then you can take a quiz at the end. But I really want us to help us understand, I think that I always talk about working with domestic violence being an experience where, I don't know if you've ever jumped into the middle of a movie and you are in the middle of a movie and you don't know what's going on and something just happened and you don't really understand, you don't know who the characters are, you don't know why the person did what they just did. it doesn't make a lot of sense because we are often coming into survivors' lives in the middle of the movie. But if we are coming in and our children or our friends had been watching the movie, it probably makes total sense what happens. So a part of our job, I think, when working with domestic violence victims is to step back and really understand how important seeing the movie from the beginning and understanding the context of what has happened is. But I really want us to think about domestic violence as this web of coercive behaviors that are often hard to identify until they really until an adult gets trapped. And I'm going to show you, this is called the power and control wheel. I think Monica is working on, I sent her a last minute message. Can you drop a link to this in the chat box, and we'll make sure to get this out to you. You can Google it also. It's called the power and control wheel. Was developed by domestic violence victims many, many years ago, just talking about the similarities of what domestic violence is and look like. So we see there it's a wheel with sexual and physical violence on the outside, but it's very important to understand that domestic violence is much more than sexual and physical violence. And it's one of the ways in which survivors get trapped. Often domestic violence begins, we talk about this web of coercive behaviors, begins with things like some of that isolation where we see somebody is in a new relationship and their partner wants to be with them all the time and is offering, showing up places and doesn't like people's friends, and is really often very attentive and caring and sweet. We see some of that intimidation and emotional abuse where you have survivors who are being called names, who are being told that they're, stupid, that something's wrong with them. Some of the minimizing, denying, and blaming where somebody says something hurtful to you and you say something about it. And then they say, well, I don't know why you're so sensitive. I don't know why you took that personally. Look at everything. You take everything personally. Why are you attacking me? Coercion and threats and intimidation can play a really, really significant role, particularly if somebody has ever been physically or sexually violent towards you. I've worked with domestic violence survivors in shelters that actually came to shelter because their partner looked at them a certain way. And they might not have been physically assaulted for months or for years. But if somebody has done that to you, what happens is if somebody throws something super close to your head, but they've hit you in the head before, that is very, very powerful. We think about some of those coercion and threats and the economic abuse where, it might be at the beginning where somebody tells you, you don't have to work. I want to take care of you. Let's start a family. And all of a sudden somebody doesn't have access to money. We can talk about privileges relating to gender, whereas we know that domestic violence impacts. I think that's one of the things that I feel like is similar when we talk about brain injury, that brain injury doesn't recognize racial lines, economic lines, social class lines, ethnicity lines, that everybody can experience a brain injury. Everybody can absolutely experience domestic violence, but we know that domestic violence victims are disproportionately women, not to take away from that happening in other experiences. But what we're going to be talking about today is one of these tactics around using children is a part of that web of coercive behaviors, about how children can become a real tool of control for someone who is abusive, and what it is and what it looks like and how that can kind of play itself out in a relationship. I think a couple of things that are just also really, really important to understand about domestic violence is that somebody who is abusive or is who behaving abusively towards their partner is not always a bad, terrible person all of the time. And that's a part of, again, that psychological abuse and that emotional abuse that often is backed by a lot of messages that we get from society about relationships. I remember getting married, and I've been happily married for 18 years, but I remember people actually telling me at my wedding that, marriage is hard and your partner's going to be perfect and you need to stick things out. So we get a lot of messages about that. But I think when we think about using the children and really, really understanding how what we know from many domestic violence victims is that a lot of people think that, if you are in an abusive relationship, I think it's also something that's very easy to to say if you are in a relationship where you are in a safe relationship and a healthy relationship where your partner treats you respectfully, it's very, very easy for people to say, I would never put up with that. And if anybody ever did that, I would never let that happen to me. But I think, again, we have to understand how coercive and how kind of undermining these behaviors are and can be. And again, when it talks about using the children, so many domestic violence, people who work with domestic violence victims often think that, or just kind of the general public, one of the most common questions I get, well, why do these victims, why do they stay? Why do they put up? Why don't they just leave relationships? I think it's leaving a relationship. I would like us to think about possibly changing our language around. We think about relationships and abuse. Domestic violence victims escape relationships. It takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of preparation. It takes a lot of figuring out your finances. It takes a lot of, when we think about all of those ways in which people who have brain injuries can be impacted. But what we also do know is that often survivors who leave abusive relationships or escape abusive relationships, one of the tools that can become an incredibly powerful tool of control over their partner is children. So unfortunately, sometimes we get situations where domestic violence survivors have left relationships, might have a protection order against their partner, which is restricting through the protection order. It's restricting contact with the children. But then at the same time are over here in family court filing for divorce, and you have family court who is ordering visitation or split custody. So what we know is children also become the way that an abusive partner can access their partner and can really use and sow some of those seeds that just makes it additionally harder for a survivor to leave. So I think that, it's really important to understand that abusers really intentionally harm the abused parent and the children in the home. Sometimes we know the co-occurrence of domestic violence and child abuse from the best studies that we have is about 40 to 60%. I don't think for any of us, it's a stretch to think that if somebody uses violence or abuses their partner and really, really thinks, again, that power and control, that right that I have to really be in charge and make decisions about you and your life, that wouldn't transfer over to children. So again, we know that there can be that co-occurrence that happens with the abused parent and the children at the home. But we also know that abusers also sabotage the victim's parenting and their relationship with their children. So that is something that when we think about very, very intentional divisions that are sown between, and I'm going to, again, just so we don't get confused, we know that it's not always the case, but I'm just going to use mother as an example for the victim and, a father as an example for the abuser, though we know families look different and sometimes it's different in different cases. But when we think about some of those ways, when I worked in a domestic violence shelter, there were children who had to go on visitation with their, abusive parent, and the children would come back to the shelter from visitation and talk about how, their dads were trying to figure out where their mom was, what their mom was doing, telling kids that, we had kids that came back that were very, very angry with their moms because their dad had told them, well, your mom kicked me out of the house and I love her and I want to be with you and I want to be with a family and your mom won't let me, back in, and I love her and I love you and she's trying to keep you away from me. And really, really also thinking about one of the things, very much teaching and modeling a lack of respect for a victim parent, for mom. I've worked with domestic violence victims who have come into shelter and literally had their kids call their mom names, kind of the violence that's modeled in the home. So I really, really think it is impossible for a victim or a mom to be the best parent she can be when she's in an abusive relationship. And I think that one of the other things that always happens is really, really examining our thought process about really recognizing that it is often the victim is doing the best that they can, but very, very intentional ways in which the abuser is making that parenting hard and making that mother unavailable for their children. I also think it's very, very true. Victims often blame themselves for how their children have been impacted. Systems that work with domestic violence victims often blame moms or victims for how their children have been impacted. And I think if there is one place that we need to really be bringing the actual cause of harm, which is the abuser, back into the center of focus, it's here. So we're just going to here, actually, we have a survivor, or what I'm learning, a person with lived experience is another terminology with learning in the brain injury world. I'm just going to make sure real quick that I click my little buttons to share the sound. And it's just a couple of minutes long, but I had asked a survivor that I work with closely, Paula, to share a little bit about how her children have been impacted and what have her reflections been.
Hello, I am a domestic violence survivor with an adult son. I am very public about my story, and so that has led to some very difficult open conversations with my son. And one of those have been the impacts of what I went through on him and some really difficult realizations. One of those being that in many ways, he feels that I robbed him of some of his childhood. I thought I did a very good job of hiding what I went through from him. For the stability, I stayed because of the children. I wanted to keep my family together. I had stability. And I don't know, looking back now, I didn't realize how much he knew. They listen to everything. And in the midst of him knowing things that I didn't realize that he knew, he felt that he needed to be the adult. He knew that things weren't as bad when he was around, so he didn't get into sporting events. He didn't want to go to, his friends' houses. He didn't want to do things that normal kids should do, because he needed to stay around and protect me. And he was a child, and he felt that he needed to be the adult, and the stress and the anxiety that caused him. And he didn't trust me because I lied to him a lot. He knew the truth. He heard it. Sometimes he saw it, and I lied. And so that still has issues between us as far as trust goes, especially if I'm dating. So I think that we need to, I'm going to be working for the rest of my life to build that relationship with my son, but I can't go back and give him back what the childhood that he should have had, instead of having to worry and take care of me. I just had no idea that it was like that, and I regret that.
Thank you all. I hope everyone was able to see and hear that. But, I think that we also heard a lot about how are we working with parents and working with again, and it's, most often mothers, around some of those feelings about what it was like for children and what that child's experience is. But again, I think that we need to go back. I think that that's something that we often see. Many victims of abuse often, again, take blame for the abuse that they've experienced. And a lot of times that's because how they're treated and what we tell people as a society, but really recognizing that it was actually her son's father who took away her childhood, her son's childhood. It was her son's father that made the decision to hurt his mom. And really thinking about that dynamics and how we talk through that. I know many of you on here are parents. And if there's anything that is tricky and tough and people are very, very sensitive to talk about, it can be parenting. So I think really figuring out how we are approaching this from really understanding what the context is and what it's like to be able to parent when you're in an abusive relationship. I think that the other thing we also just need to recognize is, again, as we talk about how children often become a tool of abuse, when Paula leaves, her leaving the relationship would have absolutely not meant that her, if her partner was her child's father would have continued to have access to that child, most likely, if they wanted to. We know that abusive individuals actually fight and sue for full custody twice as often as non-abusive individuals. So I think that that's the other thing. leaving an abusive relationship when we think about children often, and that was something that was very, very hard for us working in DV services, often can make things harder or more difficult in the short term for survivors, where we have so many stories of survivors who had children who very, very much didn't want to go on visitation with their abusive partners when they have separated. But the family court system really, really takes parental rights very, very seriously. And if anybody, and we get kind of these heartbreaking calls all the time from, survivors and people who think, oh, if my partner's been abusive to me, they won't have access to children. That is very, very, very not true. And domestic violence, actually, there have been a lot of, and anybody can follow up with me who wants more information about domestic violence in the family courts. But it can be a very, very complicated process for a child not to have any contact with their their biological parent, regardless of whether the child desires it or the mother desires it. So, I think that, again, there are always going to be exceptions, but I think that the other piece is we've learned so much, particularly from our work with child welfare, that Paula's safety and her son's safety in that situation were inseparable. And by helping parents get safer, and by helping non-abusive parents or victim parents get safer, that is really going to increase the safety of the child. And often when we talk about the victim parent is a key to resilience and recovery for their children, often their primary caregiver. So with some of the work with child welfare that we've done, and we have had children that have actually been removed from their protective parent, from their protective mom, due to domestic violence, and just saying that's the worst thing that could have possibly happened to them. So when we really, really think about, and of course, there are times when people who have been abused are abusive towards their own children. We know that, but nobody who is in an abusive relationship is able to be their best parent. So if we can help victims' parents be more safe, their children can be more safe, and they will really depend on that parent to help them in their resilience and recovery for children. So in just the few more minutes I have with you, and I'm sorry, I could talk about all of these topics for so long, but as Paula talked about, children are involved in multiple ways. Sometimes they get in the middle of arguments trying to protect their parent who is being abused, or they get physically hurt. I've worked with many victims who have had toddlers, and we think again about the impact of brain injury. I actually had a close friend who had a friend of hers who was in an abusive relationship, and her partner, she was holding her baby, and her partner attacked her and tried to yank the baby out of her arms. Baby ended up with a broken arm and a brain injury in the ICU due to that abuse that was perpetrated by her partner. Children see what's happening. Children hear what's happening. We talk about how they intervene. Sometime they often see the aftermath. And I think we heard that from Paula. They see the aftermath where something might have happened the next day, and Paula is not the same mom she is or could be. And her parents, they can see broken glasses or, things that are broken. Sometimes they're told about it, particularly, and, there are different kind of controlling that narrative about what happened. We often see abusers do that to their children and try to help their children kind of see it from, say, well, your mom was doing something crazy and I had to restrain her, and then this happened. We also know that every child's experience with domestic violence is as unique as they are. And this is another thing I feel like that lines up with our brain injury. I've heard from so many people say, when you've seen one brain injury, you've seen one brain injury. And every child has experiences a little bit different. And when we think about this, and I'm just going to talk for a couple more minutes and then we'll get some questions, and I'll make sure you have my contact information from any follow-up. We think about this unique child with this unique experience with domestic violence, the lenses of development, resilience, and trauma. There are those three kind of lenses that we want to use. When we talk about development, obviously a child, depending on their age, depending on their exposure, depending on their personality and their temperament, depending on the other adults that they have in their life that are available to support them, depending on some of those protective factors, their experience with domestic violence is going to be very, very different. So even within the same family, children can have very, very different impacts, can have very, very different responses. So we need to be looking at all of those things. We also know when we think about children, I think it's I think it's oversimplified to just say, oh, children are resilient and they can just make it through things. But really thinking about, resilience is really that, that capacity to recover quickly from difficulties and adapting well in the face of adversity. We know that there are protective factors that really help children, kind of weather storms. Children can experience a lot of storms and domestic violence, but one of those most important protective factors is an adult that is invested in them and cares about them, which often is their victim parent. And really thinking about what are opportunities we have to connect kids with things that they like, things that they're passionate about, things that they care about, and help them have the support that they need to weather this. So when we think about, and again, we know when we talk about toxic and traumatic stress, which will, the other thing that can happen is when we think about, so we talked a little bit about development, we talked a little bit about resilience. Now we know DV causes toxic and traumatic stress to victims and children, and we know children need help managing stress. They need help managing stress from adults in their lives. They need help managing stress from other children in their lives. They need strategies. They need us to help them with that. And I will point out to one of our, we actually have some materials and some resources around here that I might actually try to take you to our website real quick that you can see. But this is actually a resource that we developed about how experiencing trauma affects our children. It was actually written for parents who are coming to our services, but talks about how it impacts people's feelings and thoughts and behaviors and coping and physical sensation. It affects children at school who sometimes can't focus because they're worried about their parents. But I think what we're really trying to do a lot of times, what this looks like is this looks like bad kids. These kids are being bad. But really understanding that these children have not had the life experience or the opportunity to develop the coping mechanisms that they need to get through this. So this again is helping to normalize some of these impacts. Children were very much struggled coming into shelter, but a trauma-informed approach really helps us expecting that. Like, of course they were dealing with a lot. They had just had an abrupt change in their lives. They had been exposed to a lot of different things. They're in a new situation. They're worried, all of those kind of things. So we have a front page here, and then we have a back page here that talks about what are some strategies that can really help children. And when we think about rocking and swinging and humming and playing and creating and keeping routines, catching them doing good, some of that physical, these are ways in which we really can help kids kind of recover and respond from some of that trauma, and really recognizing that it's our job. I mean, we can do part of that ourselves, but it really is helping survivors, helping their parents kind of support them through it. So this is a resource that's available. I know Monica talked about CARE, in terms of domestic violence and brain injury in children, that is almost an unexplored field yet, but something that we're very much think about the ways in which children could acquire brain injuries and domestic violence, but also how a brain injury could also impact. We think about a domestic violence victim, all the different things that she needs to do to be able to leave a relationship, to be able to establish her own new life. But we established a framework, which is really a service provision framework to talk about brain injury and domestic violence within DV programs called CARE, which is connecting with survivors, really working with DV programs to acknowledge that head trauma and mental health challenges are common, thinking about how we're accommodating needs and referring individuals to some of those additional care from those of you in the brain injury field, from medical services, from mental health services, and then evaluating our accommodations and referrals to make sure that they're effective. And if they're not effective, that's okay. We might just need to go back to the drawing board. We have developed several tools for related, specifically written around domestic violence and brain injury, that are available on our website for free to download. Most of them are available in English and Spanish. Please use them. Please look at them. Very written. And we think about the brain injury informed, trauma informed, domestic violence informed resources around this. And this is my contact information. Very easy, Rachel R@odvn.org. I'm going to real quickly just try to share those resources, just show you where those are on my website. So want to see if we have a couple of minutes for a few questions while I do that. And I just wanted to thank you all so much for including someone from domestic violence on this really important day. I've already learned so much from the very, very brief time, and look forward to hopefully talking with many of you more and figuring out how to continue and strengthen these partnerships.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Monica, for the important points that you raised. And I agree. I think it's such an integral part of brain injury. We cannot ignore. And it's important to have you at presentations like this, both of you, and the work you've done. I am not seeing much for questions. There's one about screening for, okay, I'm sorry. Maria wrote that she's seen screening for individuals who experience domestic violence, but not so much for children in domestic violence situations. And that's related to screening for brain injury. Are there thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, and I think so. I wanted to just real quick. Yeah, when we think about kind of screening and identifying that, I mean, brain injury has really honestly, and still is in most of the conversation, in most of the country, not really a part of our domestic violence conversation. And it's just a very, very new, I think, just like many people who have been working in brain injury have talked a lot about athletes, have talked a lot about falls, have talked a lot about accidents. And it's one of those things, I think Monica and I always joke kind of like after the fact, you don't have to think about this very long for the connection to make sense. But, I spent a decade at the Ohio Domestic Violence Network, the statewide coalition, trained the whole state on trauma-informed care for 6 years, wrote 150 pages about it and never mentioned brain injury. So I think that it's really the opportunity. I think we'd have to be, I think even when I know we have people who are talking about research, I don't think we even have any idea. I've never asked those questions among domestic violence survivors, but I think it would be very, very important to really think carefully about how to do that in an ethical way. And how to do that in a way, again, there's so much guilt around domestic violence survivors that they have around their kids. And also some concerns about, child abuse and kind of reporting and what that is. So it's definitely something that we need to learn more about. But hopefully we have some resources. I did just want to pop on here real quick, just to let you know, first of all, right here under our work on, this is our homepage. If you click on brain injury, you will see we have a short video about it. We have all of our materials that are here. You can just click on and download. We actually have a new training series, a 7-part training series for people who work with domestic violence survivors. That's free. That's available through our online learning portal. And then if you want some of the resources that we printed, that we looked at on trauma, if you come here and you click on Resource Center and click on downloadable materials, you actually will get the brain injury materials right next to and I'm sorry that you got to just keep kind of clicking through, and then you'll see for advocates or people who work in domestic violence, here's our trauma and domestic violence affects youth. We actually have a copy talking about representation and diversity. We think it's very, very important that people be reflected. So we have a copy with a family of color. We have a copy with families who are white. And we also have a copy in Spanish. So please feel free to use those, download them, and I will put my email in the chat box once again, and please don't hesitate to follow up with me. Thanks, Monica. I'm looking forward to a few exciting next few years together. So we'll be back in a few years to update you on what we're up to, because we've got a lot of things cooking.
I just want to quickly, Cliff put something in the chat about accessible shelters for survivors with different abilities. And I'm pretty certain that a lot of states do have shelters.
Well, and I think that when we talk about shelters and accessibility, we are doing our absolute best on that. And I think now we're working more and more. For a while, it could sometimes be somewhat difficult for particularly people with physical disabilities. A lot of shelters for a while were like some house that somebody donated that was, then we built on an addition and put another room in there. But, the vast majority of domestic violence shelters have accessible space. And we've been really, and now there are actually domestic violence programs that are designing shelters and, kind of realizing like we can't be in an old retrofitted house forever, and are really paying attention to the accessibility pieces to that. So we're working really hard on that, and absolutely making progress.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you both very much for the presentation. It was excellent. And we'll look forward to more conversations around this issue.
Welcome back for our next session. I don't want to waste a minute. This session is effective partnerships with behavioral health. And again, I'm Maria Crowley with the TARC. Effective initiatives, as you all well know, begin with strong partnerships, making good connections and relationships with other people. For this session, we're going to learn a little bit about one of those partnerships and the initiative that it has led to. Joining me for this session are Commissioner Kimberly Boswell with the Alabama Department of Mental Health, and April Turner, who is the State Head Injury Coordinator with the Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services, who have been working together for the last few years on identification and intervention for individuals with co-occurring brain injury and behavioral health challenges. And they have some very exciting best practices they've been working on together, and are going to be sharing that with you guys today. It is wonderful to see familiar faces from my own state, and I cannot wait to hear more about your efforts. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Maria. And thank you, everyone, ACL, for allowing us to be here and inviting us in. My name is April Turner. I'm a white female, black hair, green eyes, black shirt with a blurry background in the back. I am the State Head Injury Coordinator and Director of TBI Programs for the lead agency on traumatic brain injury. I'm located in a very rainy downtown Montgomery, Alabama, at an Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services, who assist individuals with disabilities achieve their maximum potential. Next slide, please. Our agency, the Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services, provides a continuum of care from early intervention, from children's rehab to adult vocational rehab, and the independent living program. In particular, today, you will be hearing me speak about our TBI core staff, or TBI core programs. So on the slide you see before you, I have Children's Rehab Services, which is our pediatric TBI, our TBI Care Coordination Program. You also have the Alabama Head Injury Foundation, which is our TBI Advocacy, State Advocacy Program. We have SAIL, which is the State of Alabama Independent Living Program, who also helps with our traumatic brain injury services. And we have the Adult TBI Case Management Program, otherwise known as ICBM, the Interactive Community-Based Program. And it is statewide. We also have a navigation program, which I'll tell you about a little bit later, for referrals and helpline services. And again, the 4 areas that we have: the adult program, the children's program, vocational rehab program, and also SAIL and our nonprofit advocacy organization, Alabama Head Injury Foundation. So today, if you hear me say TBI core staff, these are the staff that I'm referring to. And I have to say, there are some really great individuals we get to work with every day, part of this group. So I'm going to turn it over. I'll be back to Commissioner Kim Boswell.
Thank you, April, and thank you for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here today and really excited to talk about this topic. I am a white female. I have green eyes and brown hair, and I have on a charcoal gray suit and a peach shirt. And my background is blurry because that's my office and it's really messy. So blur it so you can't see the big mess in my office. So just wanted to start out, next slide, please. Talking a little bit about Alabama structure and what is under the umbrella of the Alabama Department of Mental Health. We do have under our umbrella the Developmental Disabilities Program, the Mental Illness Programs, as well as Substance Use Disorder Programs. Our Developmental Disabilities Division is engaged in some really exciting work with a new waiver called the Community Waiver Program in Alabama, which is really designed to push our state to more fully integrate in the community through employment and really reworking the way that we offer waiver services in our state. We are very fortunate in Alabama that we closed our last developmental center in 2011. And so we don't have any institutions in our state or don't have any developmental centers. On the mental health and substance use side, we do have 3 state hospitals. We have a 268-bed acute care facility for individuals who've been civilly committed. And then we also have a geriatric hospital located in Tuscaloosa. In addition, we have our forensic facility for those individuals who are going through an evaluation to determine if they are not guilty by reason of insanity, or if they are going through a competency evaluation to determine if they're competent to stand trial. The majority of our funding in our organization, which is about $1.2 billion, our budget this year, 90% of that money goes out to community providers to deliver those services in the community. And so we have worked really, really hard in Alabama to do everything we possibly can to create a community living and a community work situation so that individuals can really live their best life. One of the things you'll hear me talk about today is really a shift to looking at our services as a system of care. That really is part of what opened the door to have the conversation about traumatic brain injury. Our system of care, particularly on the behavioral health side, is really moving to an integrated system of care. Many of your states are probably heavily engaged in crisis care and the development of a crisis system of care, or something that you may have heard about, CCBHC, or Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinics. That really lends itself to conversations about what is the best way to serve people in a different way, instead of talking about programs and who's eligible. And so you'll hear me talk a lot today about the important role of looking at our system as a system of care and how that really opened the door for the partnership with the Department of Rehabilitation Services. April,
You're next.
I'm next, great. So, really, to start out with this program, it started with a conversation around the grant. And so the grant opportunity really gave us time to really think about what do we want, how do we want to collaborate, how do we want to partner. But there are a couple of reasons why that was really easy for us. It just so happens that in my almost 30-year career, I spent 10 of those years at the Department of Rehabilitation Services. And so have strong working relationships with individuals at the department. Part of my job at the time I was at Rehab Services, I was doing program evaluation work. And so I worked on the very first pediatric traumatic brain injury grant. And so I sat at the feet of many of your subject matter experts who are on the call today and learned so much about brain injury and how important it is to identify those issues so that you can provide the right tools and the right care to an individual. In Alabama, I think the other advantage that we had is we just have a longstanding partnership that cuts across many programs and services. Our 2 departments have worked together on school to work transition. We are partner agencies in our early intervention system. And ADRS is also very integral to our new CWP waiver and the employment side of that waiver. And so I think all of those things really helped us kind of take a little bit of a shortcut because we just already had such strong working relationships in our state. Okay, next. So why would we want to partner with the TBI program? At the end of the day, it really is about increasing the quality of care. We really want the people that we serve to have the very best care possible in the right time and in the right place. Oftentimes we see people circling through our system. We think that we've gotten them on a road to recovery, but then we find out that their situation is a little more complex than we anticipated. And so really our initiative is all about removing any barriers to sustained recovery that we can remove. And so to do that, you really have to have identified the core issue that an individual is experiencing so that you can provide that quality care. Next. And why does Alabama believe this partnership is important? You know, I've talked with April about this a lot. I feel very fortunate that in my very first job at an adolescent care unit, the psychologist there always screened for brain injury. And so I really grew up in the system understanding that it was really important to evaluate that and to screen for that so that you could make sure your intervention was tailored to what that person needed. And I kind of left there thinking, well, gosh, doesn't everybody do that? And of course, learned that no, everybody doesn't do that. I also think, and you just heard a wonderful presentation on domestic violence. One of the things that's happening in the mental health arena is we're learning so much more about the brain science on our side and what kind of interventions for trauma and mental illness really help individuals as they progress. And so that brain science really is helping us figure out how we can best intervene. And our goal really is for everyone to enjoy that sustained recovery and really be able to excel and engage in their community. One of the things on the trauma side, and you just heard a speaker talk about children who are living in homes where there's domestic violence and their behavior is seen as they're just being a bad kid. Well, what we know is they're not being a bad kid, they're in fight or flight mode. And they could also have sustained a brain injury as a result of child abuse or just being in the home where there's that kind of violence going on. And so really addressing that with them oftentimes at that young age really is about community connection and community engagement. There's some things that need to happen for that child. Obviously, they need to be in a safe environment, but also so important to their recovery and their brain sort of rewiring from that trauma is their sense of community and connectedness. And so all of this in my mind really works together to improve the outcomes for the individuals that we serve. Okay, next. Next slide. Thank you. So strategies for partnering with other states to take back to their TBI and mental health programs. You know, I really do think most state behavioral health agencies are focusing a lot on trauma-informed care. And so I do believe that that opens a door and a conversation with people that maybe you haven't had an opportunity to have before, because you really do need to have a conversation of it's trauma, but did that individual also experience some violence that resulted in a traumatic brain injury? I think collaborating and cooperating on grant applications is a great opportunity to really get to know each other and to look at your system and see how you can better provide services to people. I also think that as states move, as behavioral health agencies move to thinking of their system as a system of care, you kind of get away from, well, mental health does this and rehab does that. It really does mean looking at the individual holistically and looking at integrated care, including healthcare. And that shift in our system, I think, is a really great opportunity for people to talk about, well, what is a comprehensive screening and assessment? You know, in my world, it's like, I really think it should be required for everybody. And you'll hear April talk later. It's like, once we started the conversation, I started saying, well, you need to talk to the veteran folks, and you need to talk to the hospital association. Because honestly, in my mind, it is so important to screen for brain injury so that we are providing the right care to our individuals. And, you know, I don't know how people don't do it really, because as you know, often folks are getting highly medicated when really what you're dealing with sometimes is a brain injury that needs to be addressed in a totally different way. So I think, April, the next slide is yours.
It is mine. Thank you very much, Commissioner. And I know we've got the chat. There's a lot in the chat about questions about screening, and I will get to that. I'm excited that there are so many questions about screening and identification there. So I'll just jump right in. The Adrs Tbi Program. So the doors that opened after we partnered with behavioral health. When the Alabama's 2-year ACL grant began in 2019, that was right before the pandemic began. Our first meeting was with the commissioner at the Department of Mental Health, her partners, and the TBI grant team. We reviewed the new SAMHSA article on brain injury and behavioral health, and our new 2-year grant mission and goals began. Since that first meeting with the commissioner under her guidance, we moved quickly to develop the TBI Behavioral Health Leadership Team and began opening doors for collaboration to assist individuals with TBI within our state. So we had 4 main doors that opened, and I want to talk about those 4 doors first. The first door that opened up was the physical door. Department of Mental Health Leadership Team members and TBI met with the TBI grant team and opened physical doors for their staff and for our staff to learn, and provided tours of the facilities, education to their services. They offered specifically in their facilities in areas of mental health, IDDD, and substance use. We had access and were able to tour facilities to learn more about their programs. ADMH staff, or Department of Mental Health staff, welcomed us. We visited the state psychiatric hospital. We visited the state maximum security forensic facility and community providers in the area of IDDD, chemical addictions, and mental health programs across the state. The second door that opened was the access to Department of Mental Health staff and their community providers for education, for transparency, and for collaboration. Department of Mental Health staff invited our grant staff to the table, specifically in the areas of opioids, substance use, and veterans. The state head injury coordinator, myself, was invited to join first the Alabama Opioid Overdose and Addiction Council, which in turn opened doors to the state opioid director, who connected us with substance use, community providers, naloxone treatment training, prevention programs, substance abuse training for our core staff, and provided additional partnerships through other council members. Then next, we joined the Treatment and Recovery Committee with the Addiction Council, chaired by Department of Mental Health Substance Use Treatment Director. We actively listened, we collaborated, and partnered with our court system staff, our peer-to-peer mentor networks, our state substance use psychiatrists, and statewide substance use treatment providers and advocates. The TBI grant team was also connected to a program called VITAL, which houses our expert staff. The VITAL program resides within the University of Alabama and improves wellness across state agencies. ESPERT, which is screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment in the area of substance use, their staff trained this head injury coordinator and our grant staff, and ESPERT will also train all of our core staff next month. Our TBI services, in turn, are now listed as a partnership resource on SBIRT's website. The State Head Injury Coordinator also joined Veterans Collaboratives as well to wide open that door. The Mayor or the Governor's Challenge on Veteran Suicide in our state, open partnerships with the Alabama Department of Veteran Affairs, our state veteran representative, veteran treatment and suicide programs, veteran employment programs, and VA treatment staff. We trained these partners on TBI as well, on TBI and suicide, and they joined us for TBI awareness activities and continue to promote TBI awareness in their state and national presentations. The third door opened opportunities for ADMH staff to join state TBI initiatives to learn about services and train TBI core staff. Adrs Tbi Program received new opportunities to partner, to educate, and to share resources. TBI core staff are now connected to Department of Mental Health, statewide community partners, their resources, their social media, training regarding mental health, IDDD, substance use services, and treatment options. TBI core staff, including our TBI advocacy partners, individuals with TBI lived experience, and caregivers were all trained as well by mental health and substance use coordinators on their services and supports statewide. So it was an exchange. Also, the Alabama Head Injury Task Force, which is under Department of Rehab Services, welcome members from Department of Mental Health in our working TBI state plan and our priority groups in our statewide task force. The state opioid director, program manager of substance use, and also the coordinator of mental health services are now active task force members quarterly, where we learn from each other. And lastly, the last door that opened, and there are many doors, but the last one that I'll speak about also is the openness of agreements, the willingness to come together, both agencies, and create an agreement for data sharing so that we could screen, we could identify TBI prevalence inside the mental health system and work with their staff and community partners and consumers. Next slide, please. So I'll jump in and talk a little bit about next, the TBI and Behavioral Health Leadership Team. This was chosen by the Commissioner of Mental Health and also the ADRS TBI grant staff. We met quarterly for 2 years of our ACL TBI grant. We met in person and virtually. These members were invested in each meeting. They were encouraged to give suggestions and feedback freely. And the grant staff individually met with each member outside of the meetings of the TBI Behavioral Health Team for education on ADMH programs or Department of Mental Health programs, services, resources, policies, and forms they individually offer. Our initial TBI Behavioral Health Leadership Team consisted of the State Head Injury Coordinator and our TBI staff, grant staff. Kim Boswell, the Commissioner of Mental Health, our State Psychiatric Hospital Facility Director, our IDDD Director, our Coordinator of Mental Health Services, our Substance Use Program Coordinator, and the Director of Psychological and Behavioral Sciences Services there with the Department of Mental Health. Each meeting had an agenda we put forth by the TBI grant staff, and all parties came with answers, with suggestions, and progress toward each goal. Understanding the prevalence inside the mental health system, understanding the need for screening for TBI, and training staff. This team gave their time, their resources, and their willingness to make a difference for individuals with TBI inside their state agency and outside. Next slide. Next, I'll go over finding the prevalence. So there have been a lot of questions about our screening and our findings. So screening, training, and disseminating findings. ADRS and the TBI core staff provide information, we provide referral, we provide resource facilitation, and pediatric and adult case management services. However, Department of Mental Health provides counseling, therapy, medication management for individuals with dual diagnoses, and also new onset depression and anxiety after injury, all the way into long-term recovery. Finding prevalence inside the Department of Mental Health system was needed to identify how many individuals were already receiving services or new referrals and who had a history of head injury in order to develop appropriate treatment programs and accommodations for individuals with TBI in our state. To begin with, the grant program chose an evidence-based screener, the OSU TBI ID, Ohio State Identification ID method, and it is a one-page screener to identify a history of a head injury. Next, the ADRS grant team then developed a one-page questionnaire, it's a data questionnaire, and then collected the screener and the data page from Department of Mental Health community providers statewide in areas of mental health and substance use. They were all pilots and they were statewide, including our psychiatric hospital. Grant staff trained all Department of Mental Health community partner staff, the pilot sites, on the screener, the one-page data questionnaire, and also offered a 1 hour, what if there's a TBI online training through NASHA and Dr. John Corrigan from Ohio State University. We also offered free CEUs as well from our website. All trainings were located on our TBI grant website, which is alabamatbi.org, and I'll share that at the end of the presentation. We also created a mental health tab on our website, alabamatbi.org as well, so it would be easier access for these pilot sites or any sites that wanted to screen. Next slide. So here you'll see, and it's very small, so we offered the link at the bottom. This is our dissemination plan. This was put together by Dr. Despina Stavrinos, our grant evaluator. Our dissemination results were shown here, and what it revealed mainly was that 1 in 3 in our Department of Mental Health system screened positive for a head injury and were 6 times more likely to have attempted suicide in their lifetime. The entire profile, including other factors, are all included on the results page, and you can find that on alabamatbi.org, and there'll be a link in the chat as well, I believe. After we received all of the data pages and the screeners, grant staff were also allowed access to those pilot sites through the Department of Mental Health, the community pilot sites, and the hospital. And we surveyed staff, and they assisted us, the same staff that assisted us with the screeners, the easiness, and we looked at the easiness of the screener, the data collection page, and the overall training experience. These results are also included on the back page of the dissemination report. So Department of Mental Health community providers expressed that they wanted a shorter training. They expressed they wanted more access to TBI resources. And they also expressed they wanted an online head injury screening method. From this feedback, ADRS grant staff came back. We developed a 15-minute TBI behavioral health training video for staff for the entire state going forward, inclusive of individuals with lived TBI experience. We also developed a one-pager. If you'll switch to the next slide, please. Those are our trainings that we offer, by the way. Next slide. This is our one-pager that leads from the training video, or you could use the QR code at the bottom. It goes directly to our website as well. That goes along with the 15-minute video training that we'll be offering statewide to Department of Mental Health employees and ADRS employees. And we also developed a statewide resource guide. It's developed and it sat virtually with the help of Auburn University social work program. We put together an Alabama specific resource guide that is virtual and in print, but we call it the Alabama's Brain Map to Services. So now Department of Mental Health staff can go right to it, as well as our caregivers and our individuals with TBI here in our state. Next slide, please. So what does our partnership look like going forward? There's so many doors that open, so many pots that we're in, and we're very excited about that. After 2 years of the TBI grant partnership, even more so because it was during COVID, we realized we needed to expand. the leadership team, as well as build upon TBI screening and education within Alabama Department of Mental Health system. Alabama Department of Rehab Services wrote another grant, and we received the TBI ACL grant for the next 5 years. And with that grant, we requested a partner again with Department of Mental Health to expand our partnership because we weren't done. We wanted to expand screening. We wanted to expand education within their system as well as our own. So our goals going forward, number one, identifying or developing an online screener and a data storage tool where it's ease of use for all staff. Number two, provide free short-term TBI behavioral health online training for ADMH staff, Department of Mental Health staff, as well as our own. Establish a neurobehavioral panel of experts, as we have a lack of neuropsychologists, neuropsychiatrists, and psychologists in our state. So we're looking at a panel now to help with that. Establishing a statewide TBI navigation toll-free helpline and a warm line for individuals, family members, and service providers to access at any time. And we've already done that actually. Create a white paper also from the dissemination findings that we found out from the last 2 years of our grant. We're also expanding our TBI behavioral health leadership team based on the profile and dissemination findings. As the commissioner mentioned before, the TBI grant staff, we knew that we needed to expand based on the results that we had, and she thought of more partners. We thought of more partners, and we brought them to the table. So now we are welcoming for the next 5 years our Crisis Intervention Center director. We're opening that door, and we're training them as well. The Alabama Department of Veteran Affairs, the Suicide Prevention and Community Services Director. We've opened the door to the Director of Prevention in Department of Mental Health. We've opened the door to the Alabama Hospital Association, the hospital psych units. We've opened the door to the Alabama Department of Corrections, the day reporting centers, as individuals with TBI are coming out of our prisons, our Department of Corrections system. And finally, our last goal for ADRS is to expand capacity with developing the statewide TBI navigation system for information, for referral, and for resource facilitation. We've always had a case management system, pediatric and adult. Now we needed something bigger to expand the information and referral and our resource facilitation. So we've done that. We've began that journey. And we are excited to have Department of Mental Health as a referral source now and a partner to strengthen services and supports for individuals with TBI and their families in our state. That was a lot. And I know there are many questions as well in the chat. So ADRS, we're just very thankful. We're thankful for ACL for the funding that strengthens our services and resources in our state. I want to say a special thank you today to our advocacy partner, Alabama Head Injury Foundation, which we couldn't do what we do without them. Also, my ADRS commissioner, Department of Rehab Services Commissioner, Jane Elizabeth Burdishaw. My assistant commissioners that we have, Karen Jenkins and Kathy Caldwell with CRS. And I couldn't do it without my grant staff, David White, our new project coordinator, as well as our project evaluator, Dr. Despina Stavrinos, and the TBI core staff. Couldn't do it without them. So we want to thank them for their support, for the growth of the ADRS TBI program, and allowing us to collaborate across systems to only help individuals with brain injury in our state. And that is it. So if you'll go to the next slide, please. We have put some information here. You can reach us on any of these websites. It's alabamatbi.org is our grant website. We have rehab.alabama.gov/TBI is our Alabama Department of Rehab Services website. All the core services that I mentioned, you can find on both of those. And also Commissioner Boswell's website, mh.alabama.gov. And we'll open it up for questions, Maria, if we have any questions.
A lot of questions, a lot of favorable comments about what you guys have done. And I was just trying to kind of capture some of that. One thing that's come out, I think, was the request for a concise list of all those partners that you named so that other folks can reach out. And if you guys could share that with me, we could get that out and posted. If you don't mind doing that, April, that would be outstanding.
More than happy to.
I'll
be honest, Maria, I didn't list them all out because we got started, I started listing so many, the slide kept growing, which is a good problem to have, isn't it? And so I will be glad to share those partnerships. And there are so many more. I couldn't list all of them possibly today. So I'm very thankful for those partnerships and we'll be glad to share. We didn't mention domestic violence, either intimate partner violence. We're connecting with across the board, many, many groups.
Thank you. One thing that came through was a question about, which you've touched on a little bit, but sort of some future plans, if you would touch on a little more, maybe about behavior plans, reentry plans, I guess more sort of tweaking with interventions, anything coming down the pike you want to share related to those things.
And you're talking the mayor or the commissioner, which one do you want to? I'll jump in. So our next steps as far as intervention, what we're looking at is we need to expand our screener. So first, we just did the pilots across the state. So we would like to have that online screening method where we could go into any IDDD, mental health, substance use provider, be able to offer that and let them choose whether they do it at point of application or they do it at point of intervention or plan. So that is right now, that is our priority, making sure that that staff is trained and that we have those screeners for them to be able to do at that point. The commissioner can speak of how we're going to integrate that in each division. We'll still have lots of work. We've got 4 years to figure that out too. There'll be lots of questions on the table about that.
Yeah, we really sort of plan on integrating it, and this will be a news flash to my staff, but really as a part of the regular screening and assessment, because this assessment or screener doesn't take a ton of time, then our thought process, particularly in our new crisis centers, which are, again, kind of community-based and focused on crisis stabilization, that's where we really want to use the screener as a part of the initial assessment. The beauty of a crisis center is it's integrated care. So it means people with an intellectual disability can show up there and get assessed and get directed to where they need to be. Substance use, mental illness, all of those things kind of in one place. And so that's why it's so exciting to me about the screener and really trying to incorporate it as, at least for the Department of Mental Health, somewhat of a universal screening across all of our programs. We have a dually diagnosed work group within our organization, and that's mental illness and intellectual disability, because we found that internally we tend to silo those two things. And as we've looked at some very complex cases, there are often cases where there's that dual diagnosis of a mental illness and an intellectual disability. And in that group is a group of folks with autism. And we know that if we started screening that group for traumatic brain injury, that would be a pretty high percentage. And that some of what we're seeing that's keeping people kind of stuck in that loop of the system is we're not really getting down to all of the issues that are going on with the individual. Somebody's just trying to treat the behavior. And so we do still have our own challenges, even internally, about how do we take down the barriers within our own organization so that we look at people more comprehensively. And that just a quick note about the day reporting centers. April and I talked about the day reporting centers because day reporting centers in Alabama really are the folks who are coming out of the prison system who already have been identified as having a mental health or substance use issue. And so their model is really sort of providing all of the services they need within that day reporting center. So our mental health services and substance use services are actually provided, but it's a great, great place to do the screener. And because you can also provide whatever intervention in that location, you have ready access to those individuals. And so we're just really excited. There are plenty more opportunities to come.
Excellent. My word, y'all have gotten a lot done in 2 years. I'm just so excited to hear about it. I see another question in here about anticipation of any future partnerships or integration with Department of Child and Family Services.
We have already jumped into that we have with ACL, it's called a Child Ad Hoc Committee. And it's a child welfare ad hoc committee, and we have joined in with them to learn a lot more on our side. We do have our pediatric TBI core staff who are trained, cross-trained as well. So we have been asked to come aboard and train a lot of areas in the area of foster care too. So we're jumping in those areas. Definitely need to bring them to the table too. Our table is growing as we talk.
Well, and Rachel, I hadn't mentioned this yet because, the list gets really long, but if it works out, our DHR in the state, we're looking at standing up child and adolescent mobile crisis for them, for kids who are in custody or at risk of being in custody of DHR. So we certainly could talk about using the screener as part of the protocol for that assessment as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. Cliff was asking about the Olmstead plan. Kim, are you connected with the state Olmstead plan? Was one of the questions for you.
We have been, we haven't really focused on that per se, other than shutting down all of our developmental centers, which we did a few years ago. And then we really are the new waiver program that we are looking at. We thought shutting down, developmental centers, okay, shut down all of our institutions. But then we realized that sometimes even in a group home setting, people could be just as isolated in a group home setting. And so our new community waiver program really is designed to do that community integration and employment. And so we kind of have always lived under trying to get more people in the community, which of course is part of the reason why we shut down several of our state institutions in 2012 and 2013. And so we're constantly, I would say, looking at how can we be more integrated in the community. And we've kind of done it in shifts. We shut down developmental centers first, as part of our system. And then we severely limited the number of state hospital beds for civilly committed. And so the crisis centers are also a part of trying to get to people as early as you can so that they don't have to go through a civil commitment to get treatment. And for a long time in the state of Alabama, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, if you wanted mental health treatment, you had to go through a civil commitment proceeding to get it. And so we have made a pretty big shift in our state away from that with the development of crisis services. And all of that is designed to prevent them from getting to the point to where they have to go through, have their civil rights taken away in order to get treatment.
Great. Thank you for answering that. I know we're out of time just about. I want to mention a couple of additional resources for you if you don't know about them already, and one that's coming down the pike that I think you guys may be excited about. The TBI Technical Assistance and Resource Center is right at the end of finishing a behavioral health best practices guide, which will get at doing a lot of the things that Alabama is doing with better partnering with state mental health systems to bring you guys the tools that will help you address issues for individuals with co-occurring issues in your state. It will talk about partnering, why it's important, how to do it, screening tools that are available, some clinical interventions that can be adjusted to provide better therapeutic approaches, and things that you can do with medication for clinicians. So it's kind of an A to Z introduction and guide that states can use. That's coming in the next few weeks. Beyond that, NASHA has worked on some tools related to substance use and brain injury, and a client workbook and an addictions toolkit that we can pop into the chat for some additional hands-on resources for you guys, because I see a lot of questions about where to get more. Appreciate so much what you guys have shared, your expertise and your willingness to participate. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us. April, did you want to share something? You're muted.
I'm muted. I don't know what my computer's doing. I did not even mention the workbooks that came out. We also have purchased those for our leadership team. So whatever national products are going on, please bring them down to your partnerships with mental health. We've got those ready to be on the table at our next meeting. And I did not speak about trauma registry, task force, trust fund, all that's under ADRS. If you would like to know more about my program or Commissioner Boswell's program, please let us know. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Judy?
All right. Thank you. What a great session. I'm going to introduce our fourth session of the day. This is called Strategies for Using and Leveraging Data. And we have the privilege of a couple of great speakers for this session. We have Chris Miller, who is the Director for the Virginia Department of Aging and Rehabilitation Services, Brain Injury Services Coordination Unit, and Matthew Breiting, who's the Team Lead, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, Division of Injury Prevention. And Chris, I believe I'm turning it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just have to start by saying huge shout out to Alabama. So exciting to hear what they're doing, and we're hoping very much to follow in their footsteps. So thank you all for that great work and that great presentation. As Judy said, my name is Chris Miller, and I'm the Director of the Brain Injury Services Coordination Unit at Virginia's Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services. I'm a white woman, early 60s. I have chin-length gray hair. I'm wearing glasses and a purple print shirt, and I have a blurred background. One of the first things I want to talk about today is how Virginia is using, and maybe not yet using, our registry data. Like many states, we have access to registry data, and in Virginia, this is maintained by the Department of Health, and one of our staff is able to draw down data specific to individuals diagnosed with a brain injury when admitted to a hospital. Also, like many states, we primarily use this information for outreach to newly diagnosed individuals. DARS partners with the Brain Injury Association of Virginia, BIAV, to do this outreach. We provide them with telephone book level information, name and mailing address, and they send a letter, basic information, and a form the recipient can use to receive additional information. They also can call or use BIAV's website. Right now, we have about a 3% response rate to this outreach. We're really lucky to get to work with BIAV. They're very data-oriented, and they're always looking for ways to raise this rate. They've looked at things like revising the letter to increase responses. They've looked for other forms of outreach, and they've looked at using closed-loop referrals, following up with those who reach out to see if they got what they wanted or needed. But there's information within our registry that we aren't necessarily using, well, not using yet, and it's part of our plan to maximize the use of data from a variety of sources to build a full picture of the needs and wants of people living with brain injury in Virginia. Terry, next slide, please. What you see here is a table with information from our registry showing the number of individuals with brain injury in the registry by year over the past 3 years and Glasgow Coma Scale. We use this data to make the case for funding in our most recent federal grant application. We also just used this information about the number of new individuals in the registry to help build a preliminary case for legislation being considered by the Virginia General Assembly to add targeted case management for people with traumatic brain injury. While these numbers weren't used in the final request, our state Medicaid agency provided that information. It was part of getting the conversation started. We're still likely underutilizing the full data available to us in the registry. For example, we haven't looked at the geographic or demographic information to see what might tell us. We haven't looked closely at where people are being discharged to after hospitalization to see what that tells us about service needs, perhaps service capacity as well. And we're just starting to compare this information with other data sources, but that's something that I'll talk to you about more in just a few minutes. Next slide, please. One of the ways that we're expanding our access to data is through our partnership with Virginia's No Wrong Door. The Virginia No Wrong Door system has over 27,000 resources and growing, and is used by over 60,000 people annually across the entire Commonwealth. Using our federal grant funds, we're registering all of the state-funded brain injury service providers in the program. This allows them to make and receive referrals to other programs and resources, and it also provides information about where referrals are coming from and where they aren't coming from to help aid outreach in the future as well as service development. The No Wrong Door staff are working to increase the visibility of information related to brain injury in the system. They're using tags that will identify brain injury resources more easily and will help direct people to local and general information about brain injury based on where people are clicking. As a result, we'll be able to get data to see what people are looking for, where they live, as well as demographic and other information. Annually, the No Wrong Door program with their co-partner, Virginia Navigator, will conduct an audit of the resources tagged under brain injury in the system and the number of hits they received. This will help us make sure that the system is being as effective as possible, as well as giving us a picture of the information sought by people interested in brain injury. Slide, please. What you're seeing now is a picture of the Virginia Easy Access website, our No Wrong Door portal for individuals. It's organized in a manner that matches social determinants of health and is designed to let people take surveys and enter information that will help direct them to the resources that best match their needs and wants. Individuals may also self-refer to a program rather than having to go to a program or source to make the referral for them. A modified version of the Ohio State TBI screening questionnaire is being embedded into the No Wrong Door Easy Access website. Thank you so much, Dr. Corrigan, for all your time and advice on this part of the project. If an individual takes the OSU screening here and the results indicate a likelihood of exposure to a brain injury, they'll be given a button to click for a direct referral to the Brain Injury Association of Virginia. They'll also be directed to general information about brain injury or local programs. The individual user will be able to keep their own record of surveys they've taken, resources they've checked, and self-referrals that they've made. Virginia's No Wrong Door system provides direct access as well to Virginia 211. Through a Direct Connect link on every No Wrong Door Easy Access page, an individual can talk to a live person 24/7. Virginia 211 operators will be trained to use the OSU TBI screening questionnaire and also about brain injury services in Virginia to help better direct people. In the past 2 years, Virginia's No Wrong Door program has received significant recognition of and funding for its social isolation tools. This will be another opportunity that will be available for individuals and programs to use. Aggregated data from the No Wrong Door site will then be available through the system to help us learn more, first to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the website, but it'll also give us much more information about the picture of brain injury services and needs in Virginia. The No Wrong Door team also are consistently working to see what other systems they can link with to expand the data they have and improve the picture it gives us here in Virginia. Next slide, please. Another area of interest in Virginia is evaluating the effectiveness of our state-funded service delivery system. Currently, Virginia doesn't have a TBI waiver. A little around $7 million a year is provided to 9 organizations, which last year served just over 3,200 people. All the direct service providers use a shared database that tracks outcomes based on the type and number of service plan objectives achieved for each individual. These results are collected and reported on a public brain injury scorecard. This is a system based on outcome measurement used by our state vocational rehabilitation and independent living programs. Unfortunately, many of the measures reported aren't relevant to what's important to individuals with brain injury. The measures aren't necessarily clearly defined, aren't realistic, or aren't really able to be impacted by the programs. Last year, we used some of our federal grant to provide training to our brain injury providers about how to use data to drive services. As a result, they expressed interest in improving the scorecard so that it better reflects the work they do and outcomes important to people with brain injury. So we're embarking on a project to do just that. Next slide, please. Over the next 3 years, all of the 8 state-funded programs that provide case management and clubhouse or day support programs will have the opportunity to work with a consultant to develop individual logic models that will help them create outcome measurement plans for their organizations. The consultant is also going to work with us at the State Brain Injury Office to do the same thing. Together then, those 8 programs and the state office will create a set of shared outcome measures on which all the programs will keep data in the shared database. Our office can access that information in the aggregate only. We can't see the individual consumer data. The consultant will help us together to develop a system for collecting and analyzing these outcomes. We want to be able to show the Virginia General Assembly not just how many people are served, but how they're being served and ultimately the value of their investment in brain injury services. But this information also will be used to find additional funds at the national, state, and local levels, can show the program stakeholders and funders the impact of their services, and can provide a picture that relates to the wants and needs of our customers living with brain injury. We believe strongly that there is power in numbers, and we want to have data that's useful to each individual organization, but that when looked at in the aggregate shows both the need and the value of the brain injury system. By the end of the 3rd year of this project, there will be an online dashboard that shows the outcome measures by program and statewide, and that is updated regularly. We'll provide yet another set of information to include in the overall data picture we're developing in Virginia. Slide, please. Dr. Amal Carmichael is a researcher from Virginia Commonwealth University. I share this sentiment he expressed recently as we were discussing the state plan for brain injury data sharing they're working on for us. Dr. Carmichael is adamant that data based on one source can be valuable, but that it provides a limited picture that can lead to inaccurate presumptions. Passionate in his belief that because individuals living with brain injury interact with many state agencies, sharing data across those agencies is critical to the success of the system in supporting them. For over 3 years now, the VCU TBI Model Systems Program has been collecting information about data that contributes to understanding of services for individuals living with a brain injury and ways to share that information for their benefit. In April of this year, they'll release a data plan for Virginia that shows the results of their work and recommendations for moving forward. Next slide, please. This data plan will help us to draft a more accurate picture of the services needed after brain injury and the methods used to distribute those services. It will help us establish an outline for communication between statewide agencies. And it will also help us to highlight health disparities and evaluate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic as it relates to care for individuals with TBI. This is a big endeavor, and simply releasing the plan will be the first step of a long uphill journey to implement the plan. Following the release of the plan, DARS is going to hold a summit at which we will ask representatives of state agencies, NASHA, and community stakeholders 2 key questions. How can we build connections that will help improve access to services and service delivery? How would more complete data shared across the systems impact decision-making by statewide agencies? I can't be struck as I look at these questions again to think about what has been going on in Alabama and the connections that they've been building and the great work that's coming from that. Next slide, please. On this slide, you'll see a look at some of the databases initially identified by the model systems researchers. You can see that while they all typically collect similar basic information, they differ in terms of the period time they cover and short and long-term outcomes. For example, the model systems data follows an individual long-term to track outcomes, over 3 decades in Virginia right now, but it's limited to individuals enrolled in that system. The Rehabilitation Services Administration, RSA 911, collects information on Virginians receiving rehabilitative services. CIAV, as the statewide information and referral agency for Virginia, collects information directly from individuals with brain injury and their families. Adding information from the all-payer claims database broadens what we can gather dramatically. It includes medical, pharmacy, and dental claims and eligibility files. So the question becomes, how can this information provide a full picture to help us improve services and outcomes? Slide, please. Dr. Carmarker and his team introduced to us one of our new favorite words in this process, harmonization. Sounds so nice, doesn't it? It's not enough to identify the databases, especially given that most of them don't or can't talk to each other and may measure slightly different things. Data harmonization is the process of bringing data together and transforming it into one cohesive data set to provide users with a comparable view of data from different sources. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I understand this process. I trust Dr. Carmarker and his peers to do it. But working on this project helped us to see a way over one of the biggest hurdles to try to get systems to share data. And therefore, we can start talking about important next steps in using data to improve brain injury services. Who's got the data? How are they using it? How can it be shared? What's the result? And ultimately, what's the first step? We hope we'll have more to share with you in the future about the developing data plan for Virginia and about the data plan for brain injury in Virginia and its implementation, adding additional layers of elements and data from shared outcomes, no wrong door, and information from other state agencies. Slide, please. Outside of the work that we're doing specific in Virginia, one of the benefits of being a TBI State Partnership Program grantee is the collaborative work we get to do with other states. Virginia is one of 11 states participating on a work group using data to connect people to services. This year, we're still early on in our formation, and the group is still evaluating potential focus areas. You can see on this slide the participating states and some of the focus areas we're considering investing our time on. Some of the themes Virginia is looking at are reflected in work across all the states. How do we use information to elevate understanding of brain injury at the state and national level? How do we effectively use data to improve outcomes for individuals living with brain injury? In the previous federal grant, the focus of this work group was on better understanding which states were using their registries for outreach and how they were using them. Speaking of that, next slide, please. A fantastic resource that developed out of the previous work group is this guide for using registries to connect people to services, developed by NASH's Director of Professional Development, Maria Crowley. This guide is a complete resource for developing and using TBI registries effectively, the challenges you'll face along the way, and resources for helping you to overcome them. It includes definitions, methods, and links to information about registries in the states that have them. We hope that you'll take advantage of this work to develop or improve the use of registries in your own state. I really appreciate the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the work we're doing in Virginia to fully utilize data to drive services and outcomes for individuals living with brain injury. Now it's my pleasure to pass things on to Matt, TBI Team Leader for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Division of Injury Prevention. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Matt Briding, and I am the Traumatic Brain Injury Team Lead at CDC. I just want to start off this afternoon by thanking ACL for offering us the opportunity to speak about our TBI data and surveillance work. CDC has a unique niche within the federal government in terms of being the nation's public health agency. And so our work at CDC is focused on a public health approach to reducing incidents of TBI and their effects. One of the key tools that we use is public health surveillance. And that's a term that's not completely familiar to many people. And so, just as a definition, public health surveillance of TBI is the systematic collection of data on a regular basis, such as every year or every other year, to understand how many people experience a TBI within a given time frame. So how many people have experienced TBI in their lifetime, how many people have experienced TBI in the past year. Additional important questions that public health surveillance can answer are, who's at greatest risk of experiencing TBI? What are the leading causes of TBI? How did the number of TBIs change from year to year? Is TBI increasing or decreasing in number, increasing and decreasing in the rate each year? So using that information, public health surveillance can tell us which groups are in greatest need for targeted prevention resources. It can tell us what causes of injury we should focus our prevention efforts toward. And it also can tell us whether our prevention efforts are working. So just to start in sharing some of the data that CDC has released, an analysis of the most recent data available reveals that there were approximately 223,000 TBI-related hospitalizations, and that's based on 2018 data. And there were also over 60,000 TBI-related deaths, that being based on 2019 data. Children had over 16,000 TBI-related hospitalizations in 2018 and nearly 2,500 TBI-related deaths in 2019. We'll be releasing more recent estimates soon, so please check CDC's TBI website for the most up-to-date estimates. Now, I mentioned that public health surveillance of TBI can also tell us which groups of people are at greatest risk of sustaining a TBI. Just as we found that some groups of people are at higher risk of negative outcomes from COVID, the same is true for TBI. And one factor that plays a key role in TBI risk is where you live. Yesterday, CDC presented a webinar that was largely focused on how TBI varies by residence or where you live. For those of you that weren't able to join us, we discussed a recent study that described how a person living in the state with the highest rate of TBI-related death was 3.5 times more likely to sustain a TBI-related death compared to a person living in the state with the lowest rate of TBI-related death. So that's a pretty dramatic difference. And the same study showed that states with a higher percentage of rural residents had a higher rate of TBI-related deaths. Another study CDC published recently found that while TBI-related hospitalizations and deaths combined were roughly equivalent among rural and urban residents in 2017, TBI-related hospitalizations were higher in urban areas, and TBI-related deaths were higher in rural areas. So this suggests that rural residents are at greater risk of sustaining more severe TBIs. This could be possibly due to higher prevalence of more severe mechanisms of injury, such as motor vehicle crashes or firearms. Another potential explanation, however, is that rural residents and urban residents sustain similar numbers of potentially life-threatening TBIs, but because of barriers to accessing emergency medical care, that could include level 1 trauma centers, as well as barriers to accessing specialized TBI care. Rural residents are more likely to die as a result of the TBIs they sustain. So beyond the impact of residents, other known health disparities exist related to TBI. Health disparities are defined as differences in health outcomes and their causes amongst different groups of people. A consistent disparity in TBI is the well-established higher risk among men of sustaining a TBI relative to women overall. And this is particularly true at the more severe end of the TBI spectrum. Also, there are well-known, well-established differences in rates of TBI by race ethnicity. A recent paper CDC published found that American Indian, Native, Alaska Native children and adults have higher rates of TBI-related hospitalizations and deaths compared to other racial or ethnic groups, and even 3 times higher than Asian Pacific Island people. So some of the factors that contribute to this disparity include higher rates of motor vehicle crashes and suicide, as well as difficulties in accessing appropriate health care. We know that older adults, particularly those over 75, are at elevated risk for TBI-related hospitalizations and deaths. The rate of TBI-related hospitalization and death among older adults has been increasing for some time now and has been attributed largely to known increases in older adult falls. So that's another, so that's an area where we want to pay attention when something is increasing over time, suggesting a need to devote more resources to that particular issue. Finally, a number of other studies have found particularly high rates of TBI among veterans, among people without housing, among women in shelters and emergency departments who have experienced intimate partner violence, as well as people in correctional facilities. So public health surveillance really allows for the identification of health disparities and is just one part of the puzzle geared toward increasing health equity. The TBI team and the larger CDC are committed to producing more equitable outcomes through embedding health equity principles in the design, implementation, and evaluation of research and interventions by using strategies that address environmental, place-based, occupational, policy, and systemic factors that impact health outcomes, by seeking out and strengthening multi-level, multi-sectoral partnerships, and then finally, building internal capacity to cultivate a multidisciplinary workforce. So at this point, I want to shift gears for a bit. Virtually all of the surveillance data I've described so far has been based on administrative healthcare data sets. And these count the number of TBI-related emergency department visits, hospitalizations, and deaths in the United States each year. And while these data sets are invaluable for estimating the number of moderate and severe TBIs sustained in the United States, they do not capture many mild TBIs or concussions. We know mild TBIs comprise the majority of TBIs, and because there are so many, they cause a considerable amount of public health burden. Current data sources do not capture TBIs seen outside of hospital settings. However, many people are evaluated for a TBI in primary care, in urgent care, or on the sidelines while they're playing sports. And many do not seek care for a mild TBI at all. And a 2014 Institute of Medicine report recognized the gaps in TBI surveillance and recommended that CDC establish a national surveillance system to accurately determine the incidence of sports-related concussions, in particularly amongst youth ages 5 to 21. So in an effort to address the report recommendations and to provide more comprehensive TBI estimates in general, CDC examined new and existing methodologies to address the gaps in TBI surveillance. We pilot tested a national concussion surveillance system, and that used a random digit dial telephone survey of US households in 2019. The NCSS pilot, National Concussion System Surveillance System pilot, used computer-assisted telephone interviewing, and it gathered information on head injuries experienced in the preceding 12 months. Data were collected from over 10,000 adults and their children. And while I would love to be able to share the results from the pilot with you today, we are planning to share preliminary results from the National Concussion Surveillance System pilot closer to Brain Injury Awareness Day. So in keeping with the IOM recommendation, our hope is to field the NCSS survey beyond just the pilot on an annual or biannual basis. And this would allow us to produce the first truly comprehensive and nationally representative TBI estimates in children and adults. And this would include all causes, not just sports. And it would capture quite a bit of detailed information on the nature and extent of the injuries. So in addition, a national concussion surveillance system would inform communities and states by providing national estimates of sports-related concussion among youth that occur both in and outside of sports, in and outside of organized sports. We have some estimates within organized sports. We don't have good estimates outside of organized sports. It would also give us information about the most common causes of concussion injuries. So motor vehicle crashes, falls, and self-harm, to name a few. It would provide us information on trend information so that we can understand whether the number of concussions are increasing or decreasing, and assessing whether prevention efforts are working. It would also provide insights for healthcare providers and hospitals about where patients are seeking care for concussion and how this is changing over time. So a fully supported system would make it possible also to provide state level estimates. So again, I'll say stay tuned for more on the preliminary results of the National Concussion Surveillance System pilot for Brain Injury Awareness Day. And I'd like to close by again thanking ACL for inviting us to talk about our work in documenting the public health burden of TBI. And I look forward to answering any questions from the audience. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt. That's great information. And Chris, thank you for all the information that you provided. It's really exciting to see what you're doing in your state. And I know that we're going to be in touch about all of that. So there are a couple of questions, and please continue to put your questions in the chat. One simple one is, Matt, is there a link to yesterday's presentation that we could watch a recording of?
So I think I saw it's not shared yet, but it looks like there's a note in the chat from Kessa from who we work with at CDC, and so
okay,
I think if you reach out to her, she can let you know when that's available.
That's great. Thank you. Another question was related to surveillance, and that question is thoughts on development of a national registry. What impacts do you think that will have on states' use? And I know there's been some chatter about a national registry. You obviously just talked about the national surveillance project, but do you have any thoughts on that you can share?
Sure. So I think the way that we see it is that the goals and the operation of a registry and a national surveillance system are a bit different. Some registries have been used for surveillance, but I think the challenge with a registry for surveillance of TBI is that like I mentioned in the talk, many people don't seek care for a TBI, and there are also some longstanding issues with diagnosis of TBI. Where there has been a registry used for surveillance, or the ability to basically estimate how many people have had a health condition, is the National Cancer Registry, in which we're pretty confident that the vast majority of people who have cancer will get a cancer diagnosis. They'll see a healthcare provider. It's not perfect, but we do think that is pretty well captured in the healthcare setting. That, I think, is the challenge for surveillance, is that the issues with diagnosis and that many people don't seek care. And that's why we decided that the best way to get representative estimates of TBI was to go out and reach out to people in a random way through a telephone survey. And there are other ways of doing that. There are in-person household surveys. They're sending mail to a randomly selected group of people to participate in a study. So there are other ways of doing that. But really, we felt like to get truly comprehensive representative estimates, we had to reach out to beyond the healthcare system or organized sports to capture sports concussion. So that is the goal. Now, with a registry, the purpose is often different, and that is to enroll people in studies, particularly treatment studies, to have a ready and willing group of folks willing to participate in a study. And so that it really answers fairly different questions than a surveillance system would.
Okay, great. Thanks. What impact do you think COVID-19 will have in relation to the data collection process for traumatic and acquired brain injury in the near future? Are COVID-19 related brain injury screening questions being designed? Do you have any feedback regarding this topic?
So we are currently doing some analyses to look at how COVID impacted treatment for brain injury. We know that use of emergency departments decreased significantly, particularly early on in the pandemic. And so we are currently analyzing some of that data. Certainly it impacted the activities people were engaged in. People were driving fewer miles. For a while there, people weren't engaging in, youth sports. So I think the analysis of that is ongoing. We have not done much work related to, COVID-related cognitive deficits. Our language that congressional language that guides what we do is focused pretty specifically on traumatic brain injuries, and so that tends to be where we spend most of our resources. But it's a question we're certainly interested in as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I have a question. I don't see other ones in the chat, and so I'm going to ask this, and people can continue to jump in with questions. But now I just forgot my question. Give me a second, Matt. It'll come back to me. Shoot, it was a good one. It was brilliant, actually. Wow, totally lost it. Oh, well. Other questions for Matt while I try to drudge up the one I just...
It happens to me all the time.
I hate that. It was a question I've really been wanting to ask too. Matt, or for Chris, I should say. Oh, I know what my question was. So one thing that states really struggle with, I think there are some good data out there, but really thinking about how do they take those data then, translate it to working on policy and programming within their own states. Do you have ideas, or are there templates that people can use for effectively taking national data and using that successfully at a state level in terms of, maybe with their legislature, or to do program development?
So I think our injury center had developed some templates. We had funded some states to analyze their own state-related TBI data. And so I think those are the only ones I'm familiar with. I could certainly, I haven't looked at those in a couple of years, but those were developed with the idea of being able to pass those along to decision makers within the state to make the case for more brain injury resources. I mentioned a paper that we released within the last year or two that did look at state level estimates. And so that also may be a good resource for states, if you haven't seen it already, to be able to promote those numbers to decision makers in your state.
Great, thank you. And there's a question also asking if you'll be doing more research around ACEs as they intersect with TBI. Maybe just explain what ACEs is for people who don't know what that is.
Sure. So adverse childhood experiences is it's a priority area within our injury center. And we have done some analyses that looked at these adverse childhood experiences. These are typically the experience of different forms of child abuse, other traumatic events in lifetime, such as having a parent with a mental health condition or a substance abuse problem, incarceration, things like that. And so we've looked at the connection between having experienced those in childhood and TBI and found an association, just as there's been found many associations between ACEs and childhood and a whole host of negative health outcomes, including a reduced life expectancy that has a dose response rate, or basically the more ACEs you experience in childhood, the lower your life expectancy and greater risk of all kinds of things like chronic diseases. So that is something that we have an interest in doing more work with, as well as, is a question we have asked is a TBI of a certain severity, is that potentially an ACE in and of itself, something that's experienced in childhood? So that's a question that I think that we have an interest in understanding, and are still talking about how to maybe look at that.
Yeah, that's interesting thinking also with the domestic violence presentation that Rachel and Monica provided and that trauma exposure and how that affects the brain. I know you're focused on TBI, but definitely the ACEs gets into that effect. So that's
right. It's almost as if experiencing those ACEs produces a brain injury in and of itself. And I don't know that we've thought about it that way, but it does make changes in the brain that make it very difficult to make, it just changes the way that you interact with the world going forward. So yeah, I think that's another interesting way of looking at the effect of ACEs.
Yeah. Do you know if CDC is going to release an ICD-10 mild TBI definition? If you haven't already done that, have you?
So we haven't released a mild definition. We did release a preliminary overall TBI definition, and we can, it was published a while back. We've done some work to validate, to look at some of those codes, and have not, based on that data, chosen not to update that preliminary definition. So that's the definition we're currently operating with. I don't have the citation at the top of my head, but if somebody wanted to reach out, I'd be happy to provide that.
Great. I have a question for Chris too, actually. Thanks, Matt. And Chris, I don't know if you can pop up for a second. Would you be able to share more about what you're planning regarding social determinants of health and your registry data? Is that a built-in part of what you're going to be focused on?
It's something that we want to talk more with our registry folks about what else we can access and how we can use that. And then how we can match that with other sources. So for example, if we're going to be getting some good data through the No Wrong Door Easy Access portal that really is designed around that, what are the benefits from matching that with what we can find in the registry data and what we're learning from our state-funded programs as well? Our whole goal is to see how we combine all those sources as well. So I don't know if that's exactly answering your question, but yes, and we've got to give a shout out to Ann McDonald here from BIAV, who's been pressing us to look deeper into our registry data, I think since the second day that I got here. So
that's great. That is helpful. I appreciate that. I'm also wondering, as I know you're just initially getting into this, but the logic models that you're talking about developing and some of those other tools could be such great resources for other states. Is that something you'll be willing to, I'm just going to put you right on the spot, share with us at the TARC so we can share widely?
We would be glad to. We're excited about, we're not exactly sure when we're going to be able to kick off this project, but it comes directly from work done during the last grant. And the idea of starting within each program, and it was the consultant's idea to have them do a logic model, and we know that can put fear into anyone's heart to start talking about a logic model, but she's very gentle with this, and then helping them to determine outcomes that will be valuable to them and valuable to us statewide. But we will be glad to share the results of that and what comes out of that. We benefit so much from what other states do that turning around and sharing what we have is always a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Well, I don't think there's other questions in the chat. I see Rachel added to the issue around neurological damage in the context of stress, traumatic stress. So please take a look at that. And you're right, it's very hard to separate out what's what with that. I want to thank both Matt and Chris for your time and for your expertise and information and the exciting initiatives that are going on. And we look forward to hearing more about those things as this all gets developed. I am excited to introduce our last session for the day. We have a federal partners update that you'll be able to listen to now. And I would like to just quickly introduce Becky Wolfkill, or have her come up. There we are. Okay, I see pictures now. So Rebecca will be facilitating this panel, and she is the Executive Director of the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators, otherwise known as my boss. So welcome, Becky, and I'm going to let you just take it from here, and I'll pop back up for questions and answers.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you, Judy. Thanks, everyone, for sticking with us through the end of the day today. I'd like to welcome my co-hosts today to come on stage, Donna Beachy, Dr. Nassini Umo, and Genevieve Berry. If you don't mind unmuting yourselves. I think since we don't have slides for this discussion, thought we would just all kind of come up together. And I know Nassini mentioned that she was having some technical challenges today, so she may be audio only. But so thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. It's really nice to see you all. And I want to first just thank ACL for all of the work that you have done to make today such a success. I'm really excited to talk with our federal partners here about programs that they're working on that provide resources to the brain injury community. But we know that we wouldn't be here today meeting and promoting all of their good work if it wasn't for our ACL TBI State Partnership Program and the leaders there. So Sean and Elizabeth and everyone at the TBI TARC, thank you. Today has been really just so informative and full of rich discussion. I also want to give a shout out to the NIDLR model systems. Our TBI model systems are great partners, and Matt Breeding and his team at the CDC, other wonderful federal partners of ours. So today, I get the real pleasure of introducing many of you to some potentially new federal programs to you. These folks have been engaged in brain injury and programs that support people with brain injury. And it's our mission today to make sure that the brain injury community knows that there are resources out there outside of the traditional ACL TBI State Partnership Program that we're all very familiar with. So I would love to just take a few minutes to allow our panelists to introduce themselves. And I know full bios have been sent ahead of time, so we don't need to go into too much detail, but if you wouldn't mind giving everyone sort of an overview of the programs that you're running in your respective agencies, that would be great. So let's start with Donna Beachy, who is the Aging Services Program Specialist at the Administration on Aging.
Thanks, Rebecca. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Donna Beachy, and I work for the Administration of Community Living in the Administration on Aging Division. And I work with the Office of Nutrition and Health Promotion Programs, and I'm the lead for the Falls Prevention Programs at ACL. And I'm honored to be part of this panel today that features so many experts in the area of traumatic brain injury. And since falls are one of the highest causes of TBIs, I wanted to take this opportunity very quickly just to share some information on the work that's coming out of our office. So my office at ACL is authorized through the Older Americans Act to award funding for the implementation of evidence-based falls prevention programs directly to older adults and adults with disabilities. And the link for our website, I think, is in the chat, so you can follow that. As you all probably know, data shows that 1 out of 4 older adults fall each year, and the older one gets, the more likely they are to sustain an injury from a fall, which includes brain injury. So there are certain risk factors that lead to falls, and many times these are similar to symptoms that are the result of a TBI. And they can be vision difficulties, dizziness, effects of medications, balance impairments, and chronic pain. And falls can happen anywhere, as we know. A person's home is a very common place for a fall that results in a TBI. And now, since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, more than 1 out of 3 people aged 50 or older report being even less physically active, which can contribute to more falls with injury. So this is not new information in the arena of TBIs, but what I'd like to do today is simply raise that awareness of these programs that can help reduce more falls from occurring that could cause a TBI, and to inform you of these programs that individuals can participate in if they're experiencing effects of a TBI and want to take steps to prevent another one. So we fund programs that focus on correcting or eliminating the factors that lead to the risk of falling or that fear of falling. And these programs teach exercises to help improve balance and muscle strength, and they give education on home safety, proper footwear, medication management, vision, and nutrition. And some examples of our evidence-based programs are a matter of balance, an Otago, Tai Chi programs, stepping on, and a capable program. So what does this mean for you here today? So for those of you who are individuals looking for tools to help prevent a future fall, falls prevention programs are already established in many communities. And you can find a program near you using our program locator, which is housed at the website of the Evidence-Based Leadership Collaborative, which is going to be, that link to that will be in the chat box also. So for organizations here today, if you're looking for a way to engage in the Falls Network and make those interstate connections with Falls and TBI programs, here at ACL, we publish notices of funding opportunities every fiscal year, resulting in 3-year grant awards that fund the implementation of these evidence-based falls prevention programs in the community. Our grantees are always looking for partnerships to implement these programs in various locations and to focus on that population that may be underserved. And one example of this is a current grantee that's working with their state brain injury association to reach potential participants that have a diagnosis of TBI. So one other thing is our funding also supports a National Falls Prevention Resource Center, which is currently housed at the National Council on Aging. And they provide technical assistance, education, and resources for not only our grantees, but for the aging network also. So one resource available on that website is the recording of a webinar of the importance of brain injury screenings, on which Rebecca, our moderator, presented for. And the link to that NCOA website is also provided in the chat box. So we're passionate about reaching older adults and adults with disabilities with these falls prevention programs. And I certainly look forward to working together to build the connections between the falls and the TBI networks. So thank you so much, Rebecca.
No, thank you, Donna. And this is the beginning of cultivating more of those partnerships. So thank you. Next, I think we'll move to Genevieve Berry. And Genevieve is the program manager at the Mountain Plains Region 8 SAMHSA Mental Health Technology Transfer Center in NASHA, and we as a team have had the great pleasure of working with Genevieve in the past. So thanks for joining us today, Genevieve.
Sure. Can you hear me? I want to make sure everybody can hear me. Sometimes
Yes.
I have some. Okay, great. So it is not only an honor, but it is a pleasure to be here. As Rebecca said, we have worked together closely in the last year and a half to provide a series of webinars and toolkits that address TBI. But before I get into all that, I get really excited about the work that we've done. But let me explain to you a little bit about what the Mountain Plains Mental Health Technology Transfer Center is. So it is a partnership between the University of North Dakota and the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, which is Litchi. And I'll try not to use too many acronyms here at the late stage of the day, but we provide training and technical assistance to individuals who serve persons with mental health concerns throughout the HHS Region 8 states of Colorado, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming. We belong to the Technology Transfer Center, TTC, network, which is a national network of training and technical assistance centers serving the needs of mental health, substance use, and prevention providers. And the work of the TTC network is under a cooperative agreement by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. So we are in our 4th year of a 5-year grant cycle and looking at coming up for renewal here in the next year. The MHTTC network includes 10 regional centers, a National American Indian and Alaska Native Center, a National Hispanic and Latino Center, and a network coordinating office. Each regional center has a specific focus, and our focus at the Mountain Plains MHTTC is rural mental health. So our services include trainings, technical assistance, online courses, toolkits, flyers, and videos, just to name a few. And they cover the full continuum spanning mental illness prevention, treatment, and recovery support. They are publicly available and free of charge. And I would really encourage everyone here to take a look. I'll put our website in the chat. I'm not as organized, I don't think, as Donna, but I'll put the website in the chat. And I would encourage you all to take a look. You can access free training and resources from any of the MHTTC regions. You don't have to be in Region 8 to be able to access the training and videos that we have available. So I've been with the MHTTC for about 2.5 years. And prior to that, I worked for the Coleman Institute of Cognitive Disabilities, which is where I initially learned about TBI, the impact and the scope and breadth of it. I also have a great deal of lived experience. My father was paranoid schizophrenic, and I have several autistic grandchildren. So improving mental health services for people is really a passion of mine. And the reason that I bring up my personal experience is when you are dealing with rural communities, and in Region 8, we have a critical shortage of mental and behavioral health providers in about 90% of our counties. So when you're dealing with rural communities and when you're looking at how to get this information out, having a personal contact, sharing your story, having next steps to take is really critical for being able to get the information out. And one of the best things that we did, one of our most relevant pieces of work, started in August of 2020 when I started working with Becky and Judy, and we did a series of intensive workshops on TBI. We did an overview with our regional SAMHSA administrator, Charles Smith, on what TBI is, how it impacts everybody, and then we targeted each individual group. And we targeted veterans, we targeted substance use and prevention, we targeted education, we targeted behavioral health care providers. And then finally, we also had a panel of regional experts, which was really great to have people come in and be able to share what they were doing in each of their regions. We initially started the conversation in 2020, and then we finished up with a panel and a presentation for primary care providers, which in our rural region are some of the people that see individuals with TBI first. So we felt it was really important to do outreach with them. I have links to the videos and the slide decks and everything that, again, I will put in the chat box as soon as I quit talking so everyone can access them. But I encourage you, all of the products, the toolkits, all of these things from MHTTC, ATTC, and PTTC are available for your use. There are general information emails. If your particular organization needs technical assistance, please feel free to reach out. So I think that covers my intro there, Becky.
Great. Thank you, Genevieve. And I want to just mention that all of those resources that Genevieve mentioned are free. So, you know, all very accessible and free. And Genevieve, I got a couple comments. If you don't mind just trying to increase your volume just a smidge, that might help me forward.
Sure. I worry about that. Usually I think my voice carries pretty well, but sometimes not. Okay.
And then finally, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Nisini Yumo, who is the Program Director at the Division of Neuroscience at the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. Nisini?
Thanks, Rebecca, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nisini Umo, and I have to echo some of the other panelists and say that it's a real pleasure to be here today. So I'm a program director at the NIH, specifically at the NINDS, which is short for the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, as Becky previously mentioned. I oversee the TBI portfolio within NINDS, and the research that we fund generally includes all biomedical research for TBI. So that includes anything from, well, all TBI severities, from the pediatric population to geriatrics, different stages of preclinical research. We also invest in human research as well for diagnostics, prognostics, and therapeutics, as well as phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. So there are several different ways that stakeholders can engage with the TBI program within NINDS. We offer different workshops on an annual basis that are oftentimes open to the public. One workshop that we have coming up actually is the Alzheimer's disease related dementias virtual summit that is happening on March 22nd and 23rd of this month. And this summit will have a session on TBI since it's been identified as a contributor to common clinical cognitive impairment and dementia diagnoses along the spectrum of ADRD syndromes. And anyone who's interested in attending that summit can actually register to join. I believe that the link for that summit will be provided in the chat box or in a follow-up email to all attendees. In addition to having specific NINDS sponsored workshops and summits, we also have a presence at numerous national and international conferences as well. At the upcoming National Neurotrauma Society meeting this summer, I'll actually be facilitating a workshop geared towards enhancing diversity in neuroscience and the ways that NINDS promotes diversity in its training and research programs. So I'll also provide the link to our training offices and the Office of Programs to Enhance Diversity so that anyone who's interested can directly interact with those offices as well. So I think I'll stop there and hand it back to you, Becky.
Great, thank you very much. So Dr. Yumo, I think I'm going to start with a follow-up question for you. Many of the people that are attending today are very familiar with the TBI model systems and are partners on many of their projects. And I think it would be great to better understand what your research to practice continuum looks like, and if there are ways that NINDS seeks out stakeholder and partner engagement.
Excellent question. So several years ago, there was actually an effort to integrate the TBI model systems data with the data that's currently housed in a database called FITBR. It stands for the Federal Interagency of Traumatic Brain Injury. And it's an informatics system that's operated at the NIH, and it's co-funded by the DoD and VA. And it houses clinical TBI research data, and it does this using a standardized format. So several years ago, there was an effort that involved migrating the TBI model systems data into FITBR. This was a major effort, but initiatives like this actually facilitate collaboration amongst TBI researchers among the continuum of care. So that includes investigators focused on prevention, to diagnostics, to treatment, and then to rehabilitation and follow-up care as well. So in line with talking about the TBI model systems data, NINDS also funds a large prospective observational study that utilizes the TBI model systems collaboration and data management infrastructure to identify rehabilitation approaches that can improve outcomes for individuals with TBI. So this type of work within itself can certainly have a direct impact on clinical care also. So I know some people may wonder, after all this cool, innovative research is done, what's next? How do you translate and implement those findings into practice? So one way we do that is through our division of translational research that further develops products and tools and even provides a pipeline for development and commercialization. We also have different funding opportunities, including exploratory clinical trials, and we also fund research to test whether an implementation is effective. So we've had funding opportunities related to dissemination and implementation as well. So I think I'll stop there, but to sum it up, our mission definitely varies across the spectrum, from basic research all the way up to follow-up care, rehab, and so forth.
Well, I think that's great to learn that there are collaborations happening as well between NIDLR and between your programs too, which is so important. So speaking of collaborations, one of the reasons why the community felt so strongly about the traumatic brain injury program moving to ACL initially several years ago was the importance of ensuring collaborations between disability-focused programs and research to practice. And so I'm wondering if I'm going to open it up to any of you to speak to any federal interagency collaborations that we may not be aware of, or that you're part of, that you believe is supporting the brain injury community.
So this is Ncini again, and I think I'll stop after this. But one initiative is the National Research Action Plan. It stems from an executive order during the Obama administration to improve the coordination of agency research in TBI, PTSD, and other conditions, and to also reduce the number of affected individuals through better prevention, diagnosis, and treatment. So NIH is a key player with executing the guidance in the National Research Action Plan, along with other agencies as well, some that are actually at this meeting now, including the CDC, VA, NIDLR, and the DoD. So since the inception of the National Research Action Plan, these federal agencies have actually worked together to collaborate and to advance TBI research and ultimately support and improve care for individuals with TBI and their families. We're actually in the early stages of figuring out the next steps for the NRAP. So stay tuned on that, but that's certainly an initiative that's ongoing and that has been, happening over the years.
Great. And maybe adding to that, what about, intrastate collaborations? We're always trying to help states facilitate partnerships between their aging and their brain injury program, or their behavioral health and their brain injury program. And so I think both Genevieve and Donna, you sort of spoke to the importance of that initially in your remarks, but if you wouldn't mind sort of expanding on what those types of partnerships could lead to as it relates to potentially, partnering with your agencies as well.
I can go first if you want, Rebecca. Yeah, we really believe in the power of collaboration, and our falls prevention programs, which are fully embedded into a lot of communities, are always looking to partner with the organizations or the groups that can reach some of those underserved populations. And it's more about awareness, just finding out about each other. There's TBI grant grant programs out in the community. And we are trying to make that connection. We have grantees that want to work with this population, and it's just raising the awareness that those programs are out there and educating on them on what they serve and the potential of the impact we could make if we worked together. You know, our falls prevention programs really focus on preventing those falls that bring on TBIs, but like I expressed earlier, they also can make an impact on those that have already experienced TBIs. So if we could work together to, one, reduce the need for it, and two, help those that are already in that position, that would be the best of both worlds. We have grantees, or we have programs established in almost every single state in the United States, and they can be housed at health departments, or for us particularly, since we're in the Administration on Aging, we work with a lot of the area agencies on aging. We work with the state units on aging, but we also work in health departments and other not only governmental but private organizations also. So we would love to reach out if anyone is interested that's on the call or that would like to find a connection to any of these programs, even if it's just to make that connection and find out more. Please reach out to me. We would love to start making those community connections with each other. That's the only way that word of this can spread and more impact can be made.
I love that. And I love seeing in the chat, you know, a couple of states saying that they, I saw Virginia in particular, you know, they've already have those partnerships in place, and it's great to glean from models too. So that's wonderful. Genevieve, you know, from the brain injury community perspective, I know sometimes we're always feeling like we need to insert brain injury into ongoing discussions. And, you know, it's clear from your intro how passionate you are about providing resources related to behavioral health. And, you know, once, you know, at the outset, you just got kind of the enormity of this challenge that, you know, behavioral health and brain injury are so connected. And so, you know, I think my question for you is maybe first, why was this so compelling that you know, decided that you wanted to take a lead in promoting these resources, but also how can we garner this type of enthusiasm and interest from some of your counterparts across the country and even headquarters and beyond?
Well, okay, can everybody hear me? Let me start this now. I have given so many trainings where people are like, Genevieve, we can't hear you. So I think, first of all, I thought what Donna said at the end of her comments was perfect for rural communities. It is a community conversation. And in Region 8, we have we do a needs assessment. Our MHTTC does a needs assessment, as does each regional MHTTC. And a couple of the things that came up for us, we are called the suicide belt in Region 8. So we have a high rate of suicide for several different reasons. But as I looked into that and composed trainings and got things together and talked to people on our advisory board and talked to our state mental health directors and talked to different people that were working in substance use and prevention, it became clear to me, based on my background with Coleman, that TBI was one of those things that was in there. You know, they call it unseen, and lots of times people that are suffering from TBI, from falls or from other kinds of injury, they don't even know. And so as you start to look at, we are looking at trying to address this problem with minimal resources, minimal providers, problems with access, kind of like what Matt said, problems with access. Broadband is not ubiquitous. So even when COVID hit and everybody, we did a big telehealth training and got everybody over, it's just not ubiquitous. So within our region, we have a couple of issues. We have not much workforce. We don't have very many people doing the work. They're not highly educated or trained. Mental health literacy and stigma in rural communities is the #1 barrier to people accessing help. So you take those components, and then you add in a TBI diagnosis, which providers don't know about. The individuals suffering from them don't know about it, and it just becomes one kind of a big mess. And so, as I was talking to Charlie, we're really fortunate. Our regional SAMHSA administrator is very passionate about TBI. So he and I were able to connect in a conversation, and I said, this is what I'm seeing from the TA requests I'm getting. People don't even understand what they're seeing, and if they are suspicious of it, both in substance abuse clinics and in schools is where I was getting a lot of requests for help. And so what Charlie and I decided was that the thing to do was to begin that conversation. Begin these conversations. We are a regional provider, and so even though when the TTC network started, it was on a national level, we focused down to a regional level. And so I tend to look at, in terms of outreach, primary care providers, extension offices, because a lot of our agricultural workers are suffering from a high degree of TBI. So it was a lot of intersecting things. MHTTC for the first 4 years has been a lot like herding cats. And I was fortunate enough to have some background in this and to have a passion for it and to understand the role that it plays. So you have to find that person that is engaged, that is connected, that has a little bit of knowledge and is willing to expand on that and willing to kind of push the message forward, I think. And I've had those conversations with my colleagues and our ATTC. Then you know this, Rebecca, because you helped with the putting together of a toolkit for substance abuse. So it grows. But person-to-person contact in the rural communities, picking up the phone and making a call, driving out to see the person, having this conversation, listening to what their concerns are, and understanding the limits that they're working with. Those are all really key. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I got here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's perfect. Donna, one of the things that kind of struck me at your intro when you were discussing your programs was the focus on adults with disabilities as well. And I think many of us, when we're thinking about falls prevention within your agency, are thinking specifically about older adults. And so if you could speak a little bit more to the work that you're doing related to falls prevention for people with disability, and then specifically let us know, are there any evidence-based programs focused on people with brain injury? That would be really wonderful information for us.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, I mean, it's such a broad term to say persons with disabilities, and we have 16 pre-approved programs that we focus on, and there's so many aspects of them that can help with so many different types of disabilities, from chronic diseases to just balance or medication management. I mean, there's so many things that come together and involved in that. And yes, through our funding, we definitely do service not only those older individuals, but adults who do have the disabilities, and we welcome that. And your question surrounding particular programs, out of those 16 programs that we have approved for our funding, many of them focus on different aspects that could help either adults that have certain conditions that could lead to falls, or that have conditions that could have some corrective actions. For TBI specifically, though, we have a matter of balance, which, as you mentioned earlier, I saw in the chat box. Yes, there's a lot out in the community, and it's such a great program because a matter of balance, just to give you a feel for what our programs are like, it's an 8-week program. You meet 2 hours a week, and it can be a group intervention, and it emphasizes practical strategies, and it not only to increase activity, but to change your environment, change a home environment to accommodate disabilities or risk factors that come into place, and also exercises and to increase that strength and that balance to help with many more things just beyond the risk of falling even. And then the other one we have that really focuses on a lot of those conditions that may be comparable to a person who has a TBI is the TBI program. And this one involves both a physical therapist and an occupational therapist who will do referrals to the program. It's like an 8-week program, and it's a lot on improving strength and balance also. And there's a piece of it that's overseen by a workshop or interaction with the PT or OT. And then there's a lot of self-management where there's follow-up so that can be incorporated into the lifestyle. And these are ongoing programs. So it's not a one and done. You're going to be involved with the leader that really wants to see some progress in this respect. And one of the good things that has been happening in the past 2 years is that since the beginning of COVID, when a lot of the in-person classes were all canceled due to social distancing and the pandemic itself, we have created a very large network of virtual programs now also. So a lot of these have been approved. They do maintain their evidence base in terms of the results through a virtual programming of a lot of these evidence-based programs that we offer. So that's been a very good add. It not only provides the opportunity to continue these interventions during COVID, but even beyond when we didn't have COVID, if there was transportation issues or difficulties with attending in-person classes, now we can reach that population that may not be close enough to attend or may not have the ability to attend. So now we can reach out to them virtually. Of course, we're experiencing what everyone else said too with, there are definitely some challenges to virtual programming, but as each day progresses, we try to get lessons learned and best practices on how to be able to reach those people in our community virtually. So there you go.
Absolutely. The silver linings, I know for sure, of all of this. Well, I know one question that many of our attendees are wondering is, how they can become aware of funding opportunities, programs, resources that your agencies are all letting. And I know we've been putting some links in the chats, but maybe we'll start with you, Nasini. How can folks find out when there might be some funding or resources coming down that they can take advantage of?
Yeah, so there's definitely links in the chat related to the funding opportunities within NINDS. But in general, for researchers, we offer multiple different grant mechanisms, including those for new investigators and trainees, more established investigators, individuals that are seeking career development and fellowships for pre and postdoctoral students as well. Typically, we have 3 different funding cycles each year. We operate on a pay line, so that means that applications that are above the pay line or within the highest percentiles, those applications are most likely to be funded. In recent years, applicants that were within the top 14th percentile were the ones that were most likely to be funded. So there is some wiggle room with this. For instance, for early stage investigators, that pay line is actually increased to applicants within the 25th percentile. So there's definitely wiggle room with that. So for those that are interested in learning more about the funding opportunities at NINDS, again, I shared that link with the meeting organizers, so I'm sure that they'll be happy to provide that information in the chat. Thanks, Becky.
I see it in there now. Genevieve, would you like to go next?
Well, sure. Although I will, to be fair, the MHTTC and the TTC networks don't have funding opportunities. However, SAMHSA has many, many funding opportunities. And Charlie was kind enough to send me 2 very long lists of grants. But some of the key ones that that he recommends that anyone looking for funding through SAMHSA might investigate includes the Community Mental Health Services Block Grant. A lot of our rural communities access those funds, and TBI is especially for screening and referral. A lot of those dollars are being used that way. Also, a Substance Abuse Prevention and Treatment, SAPT block grant. There are projects for assistance in transition from homelessness, which is called a PATH grant. Protection and advocacy for individuals with mental illness, which he's calling a PAMI grant. I don't know what he's calling it. Also, the state opioid response, the SOAR, or the tribal opioid response SOAR. And when Charlie and I talked, he is in our region in particular, and again, this goes back to conversations and being able to connect with people that have a passion for it. He's saying that as education comes about and there's more recognition of the role that TBI plays in each one of these situations, right? Substance use, regardless of what caused it. Regardless, a lot of sometimes the grantees, I know a friend of mine works for ARCOR and does opioid response throughout rural communities across the United States, and it becomes less about what, not that it's not important for diagnosis and some of the other programs, but from our perspective, looking at a checklist and trying to be able to diagnose it and then move appropriately is what they're using a lot of these funds for. He has a bunch of recommendations for discretionary grants, so I'll just put those in the chat, Becky.
That would be great. Yes.
All of those.
Thank you. That's perfect.
Sure.
And Donna?
Yeah, thanks. So in our office, we're fairly focused in on, we are the Office of Nutrition and Health Promotions Program. So we get funding for discretionary grants, and we typically have a funding opportunity cycle that's annual. So we actually publish usually around November of each year. And of course, those are put on grants.gov since they are federal grants. And we try to get the word out through as many networks as we can, which is why these partnerships, like within ACL or within CDC, we try to get the word to each of them when we are releasing our funding opportunities to get to their populations, to their stakeholders. We also go through our aging network, also through the National Council on Aging and others. And our grants are available to any government agency, nonprofits. They can be faith-based organizations. The only ones we don't fund would be individuals or for-profit organizations. So it's wide open, and we strongly encourage partnerships and bringing those partnerships together to apply for our funding. So we hope if you're interested at all, please reach out. We would love to see it brought to your community.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We will definitely follow up for some additional information as well, Donna, and make sure that everyone has that information. It's great to hear that you fund such a broad array of interests, and collaborations are essential. So it's wonderful to hear that. Well, I think we're getting close. We have 2 minutes left to the end of our time. Judy, I don't know if there are questions or how you would. I'll turn it back to you.
Sure, thank you, and great information. Thank you all for being a part of this session. There was one question, and I tell you, the chat is fast and furious for my brain this time of day, but the one question that I saw is I have 2 center programs that I would like to get going. One is CRCF, not sure what that stands for, by the way. One is Equine Assisted Therapeutic Work Hardening Naturistic Program located in South Carolina. And she would love, I think it was a she, love to collaborate with the right person or entity who can help. Any thoughts on collaborations related to that? I'm sorry, it's a pretty specific question, and I hope I asked it correctly. Oh, Community Residential Care Facility is CRCF. Might have been a stumper, Sarah. So I'm seeing something in the chat here. Is this what Genevieve's sending? Okay. Sarah, please send me your email and I will do some digging and try to find an answer to your question, since we don't have that for you today. So go ahead and just put it in the chat. We'll get your email and we'll see what we can find out for an answer. And honestly, that takes us to the end of the time here. So thank you all again very much. Appreciate it. And Becky, thanks for facilitating.
Thank you.
So just a couple of wrap-up slides. I know we're at time. Terry, can you put up the evaluation slides, please?
Someone else is going to put them up.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, there they are.
Okay. If you could take a minute to answer the evaluation questions, that would be very helpful to us. Thank you for that. And then I think Elizabeth is going to be.
I'm going to say the wrap-ups and thank yous. Yes, thank you. So this has been a really great day. I have learned a lot today, and it's been just wonderful to share this time with all of you. I want to give our special thanks to Alison Barkoff for her opening remarks and Jill Jacobs for stopping by and introducing herself. I'd like to thank our presenters from the TBI Advisory and Leadership Group, the TAL group, and our TBI State Program grantees from Ohio, Alabama, Virginia, and their partners. And special thanks to our federal partners from the CDC, the Administration on Aging, and SAMHSA. And my special thanks to my partner in crime, Sean Calloway. And we couldn't have pulled this all off without the help of our TAR staff, Maria, Judy, Rebecca, and Vivian, Ben, and Terry. Thank you so much. And Sitka for handling our webinar logistics. So thank you everybody for joining us today. And at this time, we will end the session. And I wish everybody a wonderful day. And to our TBI grantees, I hope to speak to you soon. Bye, everybody. Thank you.